Chapter 76 How dare you order me? Hearing this, Crocodile's pupils shrank, and it seemed as if a thunder exploded in his heart, and his expression was blank. Seeing the change in this guy's expression, Darren sneered in his heart. This guy has been rushing all the way from the first half of the Grand Line Paradise to the New World, and he probably didn't encounter too many decent opponents. After all, he had almost offended all those famous guys, so how could he have the time to deal with a newcomer like Crocodile? It was for this reason that Crocodile asked the Navy for help so arrogantly. In fact, Crocodile's strength is definitely not weak. With the strength he just showed, even some elite lieutenant generals of the headquarters are definitely not his opponents. But that's all. There are many factors that can affect the outcome of a battle on this sea. Under the general-level combat power, it is not uncommon for the weak to defeat the strong. But the general-level combat power is an extremely clear and disparate watershed. If you can't become a general, you are all ants. Except for natural monsters like Darren, Sakaski, and Borsellino, others are crushed when facing the general-level combat power. Then, goodbye, Crocodile. A hint of interest flashed in Darren's deep eyes, and he raised his foot with a sneer. The dark and cold armed color domineering, like a spiral hurricane, quickly lingered on the military boots on the right foot and hovered over Crocodile's head. Looking at that dark foot, Crocodile felt a sense of oppression of death, and a chill ran down his spine. Damn! He gritted his teeth, his blood-stained young face full of unwillingness, tears seeping from the corners of his eyes. It was not because of fear of death, but regret. I haven't challenged Whitebeard yet. Is he going to die here? But the pride in his heart prevented him from even asking for mercy. Darren's mouth curled up. He stepped down with one foot. Crocodile closed his eyes. Kaji and other Navy turned their heads away, unable to bear to watch the next bloody and cruel scene. Kang! Bang! However, the expected muffled sound like a watermelon bursting did not come out. Instead, a sharp sound of metal clashing suddenly sounded. The strong wind spread out, blowing Crocodile's blood-stained hair into a mess. He subconsciously opened his eyes. What came into view was a white leather shoe, which was blocking the Admiral's military boots. The competition of strength and dominance between the two people burst out a terrifying strong wind. This. Crocodile's pupils contracted, and he opened his eyes to see a figure in a pale silk robe who had appeared beside him at some point, helping him block Darren's fatal blow. CP0. The strong wind blew the yellow sand, and the moment he saw the figure clearly, Kaji's face changed slightly, and he couldn't help but exclaim. The figure of the man was as thin as a ghost, wearing a loose white robe, and a mask with strange patterns covering his face. I thought you would continue to hide and watch the show. Darren seemed not surprised by the sudden appearance of CP0, and a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. In fact, he noticed the existence of this guy the moment he landed on the island. This guy didn't know what special moves he used to hide his breath very well. If it weren't for Darren's observation, hockey greatly improved under categories, teaching, and derived the ability of magnetic field sensing. If it were the old him, he really wouldn't have noticed the existence of this CP0. Crocodile is the person chosen by the government, and you can't just kill him like this. The hoarse, stiff, and indifferent voice came out from under the strange mask of CP0, revealing a kind of arrogance. Oh. Darren raised his eyebrows and subconsciously increased the strength of his feet. Feeling the pressure from his feet, the CP0 frowned under his mask. This guy is unexpectedly strong. However, he didn't care about it, and just said coldly. The government is about to launch a plan to select candidates with sufficient strength from the pirates and grant them the right to legally plunder. With the permission of the government, these pirates who are granted legal rights will use their own strength and reputation to deter and strike ordinary pirates, and must accept the government's compulsory summons at certain times. As soon as these words came out, Cake and other Navy officers changed their faces and looked unbelievable. Granting pirates the right to legally plunder. Isn't this just throwing their Navy's face on the ground and stepping on it hard? As we all know, the Navy takes the banner of eliminating pirates and promoting justice, and naturally it is politically incompatible with the evil pirates. Once the government is this, it will undoubtedly be a direct slap in the face of the Navy. And it's the kind of slapping sound. I see. Darren looked at the CP0 with a half-smile. So the government has already questioned the combat capability of our Navy. To the point of giving in to the pirates and granting them legal rights and status. Almost as soon as the CP0 opened his mouth, he realized the government's goal. The 7 Warlords of the Sea plan. In the original plot, the 7 Warlords of the Sea are the great pirates recognized by the world government. Each member has a catastrophic destructive power and a huge combat power that rivals the country. The 7 Warlords of the Sea are known as the 3 major forces of the Grand Line together with the 4 Emperors and the Navy headquarters. Only pirates with high popularity or strong strength that can intimidate one side are eligible to be selected as the 7 Warlords of the Sea. Since crossing, Darren has been very curious about when the 7 Warlords of the Sea plan will be launched. I didn't expect it to come so early. CP0 said coldly. This is not something you should care about, Rogers Darren. I am here on behalf of the government's order. As a member of the Navy, you only need to follow orders. Crocodile has entered the government's specific investigation list. No one is allowed to kill him before the adults make the final decision. Hearing this, Darren suddenly calmed down. I understand. A harmless smile appeared on his face. So the government has been observing Crocodile, and even when he asked the Navy to send out a distress signal, you also stood by and watched. Just to observe his strength. You can understand it this way. CP0 did not notice the coldness in Darren's smile, perhaps because he thought he was in a high position and didn't care. Okay. Darren nodded and slowly retracted his foot. Seeing this, Crocodile couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Since it is the order of the 5 elders, I can only obey it. Darren sighed helplessly. But, he suddenly laughed. He put his 5 fingers together, and the 3-finger dragon claws tore through the black light, and attacked boldly. Under the shocked eyes of Crocodile, Kaji and the Navy, Darren's extremely sharp claw pierced directly through CP0's chest. Quote, you dare to order me. Darren suddenly clenched his 5 fingers. Paw. Blood splattered. Chapter 77 Topman Vochuli Saint. The beating heart exploded in his hand, blood splattered. The pupils under the CP0 mask quickly dimmed, and blood gushed out of the hole in his chest, staining the white silk robe red. With a bang, the body fell to the ground, and the blood gathered into a pool. Dead silence. Silence. Crocodile looked at Darren, who suddenly attacked with shock, and his pupils shrank violently. The faces of Kaji and other Navy were full of disbelief, and they couldn't believe their eyes. Darren, you killed him. Kaji swallowed his saliva with a grunt, his face pale, and his voice trembled. That was a member of the highest intelligence agency under the world government. To some extent, it can even be regarded as the superior organization of the Navy. Did Darren kill this CP0 to openly defy the orders of the world government? I don't want to either. He's too arrogant. Darren shrugged helplessly, took out a handkerchief from his pocket, and slowly wiped the blood on his hands. Kaji. The Navy. They looked like they were about to cry. They are so arrogant. There is a reason. CP0 is directly under the orders of senior officials of the world government and even the 5 elders. Not to mention you, a vice admiral of the Navy headquarters, they won't give face to even the Navy Admiral Sengoku. At this moment. Bulu Bulu. Bulu Bulu. A gentle Den Den Mushi call suddenly came from the arms of the CP0 member. Kaji and the Navy immediately took a breath of cold air and their faces changed suddenly. It's over. It's over. The world government must be checking the status of his mission. This time it can't be covered up. Kaji grabbed his head with both hands, looking frantic. Calm down. Darren smiled disapprovingly, casually touched the corpse of CP0 and took out the military Den Den Mushi that was calling. In the confused eyes of Kaji and others, he directly pressed the connect button. Mashimoshi. As Darren greeted, the military Den Den Mushi was obviously stunned for a moment, and then a gloomy voice came out. "Who are you? Where is Falcon?" Darren smiled and said. For more novels 109,546 join. Report to the Lord, I am Rogers Darren, Vice Admiral of the Navy Headquarters. Falcon, if I am not mistaken. He glanced at the corpse on the ground with a smile. It should be that CP0 member. The other side of the Den Den Mushi. Pangu City, the headquarters of the world government. Rogers Darren. The 5 elders, who were standing or sitting, were all stunned, and the 5 elders wearing samurai uniforms paused in wiping their long swords. Darren, why do you have Falcon's Den Den Mushi? The bald, mustachioed Saint Damocles frowned and said in a deep voice. I am Saint Damocles. How is Falcon now? While speaking, Saint Solomon, who was maintaining the peerless demon sword, raised his head, and his eyes behind his frameless glasses flashed with a deep cold light. On the Den Den Mushi side, upon hearing this name, Kaken other Navy officers took a breath of cold air, and felt a chill running from the soles of their feet to their foreheads. Saint Damocles, the highest authority and leader of the world government, one of the 5 elders. As the god of law, he also has another honorific name, that is, Saint Topman Vochuli. This matter is actually being watched by the 5 elders themselves. They only felt their hands getting cold. But Darren, the person involved, did not change his expression at all, and a smile appeared on his lips. Report to the lords, things have changed. Falcon was killed in the process of performing the mission. What? Saint Damocles? No, Saint Topman Vochuli said with some doubt. His old eyes flashed with suspicion, and he said coldly. Who is the murderer? Hearing this question, Kaji and other Navy officers trembled all over. Oh, it's Crocodile. Darren said with a smile. Crocodile, who was originally watching the excitement, suddenly widened his eyes and stared at the Vice Admiral. Crocodile discovered Falcon's tracking, and a big fight broke out between the two. Darren spoke without hesitation. By the time I arrived to support, Crocodile had already killed him. Kaji. Navy officers. Crocodile. They looked at the Vice Admiral standing there and talking nonsense with a confused look on their faces, and their mouths twitched wildly. Especially Crocodile, he was so angry that his whole body was shaking and his face was red. If it weren't for the serious injuries on his body, he would have been unable to hold back. I'm going to rush over and fight with Darren, that bastard. After hearing Darren's answer, the 5 elders on the Den Den Mushi fell silent. After a few seconds, Topman Vulchuli Saint spoke again. What's Crocodile's situation now? Darren said solemnly. Don't worry, sir, I have already controlled the target. As long as you give the order, I will execute the prisoner on the spot. Crocodile's eyelids twitched. No, Crocodile is one of the candidates we are assessing. Topman Vulchuli Saint stopped Darren. After pondering for a moment, the 5 elders briefly told Darren about the plan of the 7 warlords of the sea. Since Crocodile has the strength to kill Falcon, it is enough to prove that he is indeed qualified to be included in the candidate position of the 7 warlords of the sea. Darren, you did a good job. I was right about you. I saw your talent and ability in the last incident of Shield Saint in the North Sea. Since you are here, I will grant you temporary rights to recruit the pirate Crocodile as a 7 warlord of the sea. Darren bowed slightly and nodded. Everything is as you wish. By the way, Topman Saint Vochuli. You can call me Saint Damocles. Topman Saint Vochuli smiled and said. This is the name I took when I was training incognito to warn myself. Yes, Saint Damocles, what about Falcon? Darren asked. It's fine if someone dies. The dead have no value. Topman Vulchuli Saint said indifferently. Okay, sir. Darren nodded, he paused, suddenly seemed to remember something, and said. Regarding the other candidates for the 7 warlords of the sea, do you have any special ideas? Topman Vulchuli Saint made a puzzled sound. Darren smiled and said. I don't mean anything else, but regarding the other vacancies of the 7 warlords of the sea, I may have a very suitable person to recommend. Who? Don Quixote da Flamingo. Well, Old readers all know that Damocles Saint uses the setting of the previous book, but was backstabbed by Oda. I barely go back here and it doesn't affect the overall reading. Chapter 78. Congratulations on becoming the Honorable Seven Warlords of the Sea. Don Quixote Doflamingo. Hearing this name, the eyes of the five elders on the Den Den Mushi side flashed a cold light at the same time. The image of a blonde kid with a rebellious expression emerged in their minds. They clearly remembered the scene a few years ago. The blonde kid wearing sunglasses, holding a bloody head, climbed up the ladder of heaven step by step, came in front of them, and threw the head at their feet. "This is my father's head. I want to become a celestial dragon again." He said so. "Darren, what is your relationship with Doflamingo?" Topman Vultuli's tone turned cold. Darren smiled and said, "Report to the Lord, I have no direct relationship with Doflamingo. During my tenure in the North Sea, the Don Quixote family led by him grew rapidly in the North Sea. I have launched many campaigns against it, but unfortunately, I failed in the end. This is the negligence of my subordinates. But this also reflects that Doflamingo does have great talent and potential. Since you are now preparing to find candidates for the Seven Warlords of the Sea, I just think that Doflamingo may be a very good candidate. At least." He glanced at Crocodile with a smile. His strength may be more exciting." Crocodile's face suddenly turned red and he clenched his teeth tightly. The five elders fell silent at the same time. They exchanged glances with each other, as if confirming some information. Topman Vultuli narrowed his eyes and said slowly, "Darren, Doflamingo is just a small pirate in the North Sea. He is not qualified to be the Seven Warlords of the Sea for the time being. He is not within our consideration." The smile on Darren's mouth inexplicably added a bit of coldness. "I understand, my lords. In that case, I will not bother you anymore." Well. The communication with Den Den Mushi was interrupted. "Ha!" The Den Den Mushi in his hand was crushed, and a hint of murderous intent flashed in Topman Vultuli's eyes, and he said in a cold tone, "Who does this ignorant Navy kid think he is? He actually wants to interfere in the selection of the Seven Warlords of the Sea." The five elders holding the samurai sword sneered. "Damocles, you don't believe his words, do you? We all know the strength of Falcon very well. Although it has not yet reached the level of the strongest shield of the celestial dragons, it is definitely not something that Crocodile can kill." Topman Vultuli glanced at his friend and sneered. "Of course I know, Azamburn v Nasujuro. But what does it matter? A CP0 agent died, and they, as the highest leaders of the world government, did not feel sorry at all. It's just that I didn't expect that Darren, this kid, would grow up so fast. This time he raided the 10,000 nations, so the commotion was too big. Many member states and non-member states were uneasy about the Navy's possession of such ultra-long-range strategic strike power." After these words came out, the five elders were silent, their eyes darkened. In front of them, there was a file. On the first page of the file, Roger's Darren's name and photo were clearly visible. The god of finance, Azamburn v Nasujuro, gently stroked the purple-black blade with his thin fingers, and said with a dark look in his eyes, "The wind direction of the Navy has begun to change. Under the influence of Darren, the Navy has once again shown the signs of being out of our control. Especially the younger generation of kids, each one is more unruly than the other." The blonde five-elder shepherd Tenpit suddenly said, "At least Borsellino still obeys our orders, right, Satan?" He looked at another of the five elders. The man was wearing a black suit, had white curly hair, a fluffy white beard, a black flat hat, and a withered cane in both hands. The god of science defense, Saint Jagalucia Satan. Saint Satan nodded and said in a cold voice, "Pelusellino has always obeyed the government's orders. He has always performed the tasks of imprisoning and supervising Vegapunk very well." Topman Voculi Saint, also known as Saint Damocles, smiled and said, "Perhaps we can use this to create a conflict between the two of them." The god of environment, Saint Marcus Moshe, who had a long white beard and was one of the five elders, shook his head and said, "The primary problem at hand is the plan of the Seven Warlords of the Sea. The kid Darren has grown up. The threat he showed in the 10,000 Kingdoms is no less than that of the Golden Lion. The existence of the 7 warlords of the sea can curb the pirates of the New World on the one hand, and can also be used to curb the Navy on the other hand. But we can't push Darren too hard. The golden-haired 5 elders suddenly said. So, the method we used back then can't be used for the time being. Saint Satan lowered his eyes and said. Yes, he is not Zephyr after all. Top man Vochuli Saint said slowly. With his character, if we push him hard, we will get an enemy that is crazier and more difficult than the Golden Lion. Confidence and wisdom in control of everything flashed in his eyes. In fact, this kid's character is also a good thing for us. Power, status, fame, women. Since he is greedy for these things, we will give them to him. As long as he has desires, we can easily control him. The most troublesome thing is those guys who are stubborn. Hearing this, the other 5 elders all smiled. Agree. 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 Second. Darren looked at the military Den Den Mushi that was slowly falling asleep, sneered, and crushed the Den Den Mushi in his hand. It's really infuriating. These old guys. He slowly exhaled a dragon-like smoke, turned his head to look at Kaji and others who looked dazed, and grinned. Isn't the matter solved now? Kaji. A group of Navy. Ignoring them, Darren turned around and walked towards Crocodile. You heard it too, Crocodile. Darren came in front of Crocodile, squatted down, picked up a handkerchief to help him wipe the blood off his face. It seems that I can't kill you, what a pity. Crocodile glared at him. Hey, don't look at me like that. When you killed the Navy, you didn't care about their feelings. Darren shrugged helplessly. However, the death penalty can be avoided, but the living crime cannot be escaped. You must have killed a lot of Navy and civilians from the Grand Line to the New World. So, it's not too much to leave something behind, right? Crocodile was stunned. Before he could react, Darren's eyes became sharp, and he suddenly pulled out Yan Mo and cut it off with one knife. A severed hand flew upside down. Crocodile's brain went blank for a moment, and then he felt unprecedented pain. His eyes were full of bloodshot, and he roared in pain. Ah! His body was shaking on the ground, his right hand tightly covering his left wrist, and the bright red blood couldn't stop oozing from his fingers. Well, this is in line with the plot. Darren said a joke that only he could understand. By the way, I'll give you a suggestion. This broken left hand can be equipped with a golden hook, so that it looks more like a pirate. In addition, he raised his military boots and stepped on Crocodile's chest. In the latter's eyes, he leaned over and said in a low voice. Remember, I don't kill you, not because of the order of those 5 old immortals. Believe me, I have such ability. Even if I kill you here, they will only scold me at most, which is not a big deal to me. I don't kill you because I have higher expectations of you. Remember, Crocodile. Darren's eyes did not hide his burning ambition. From this moment on, you are one of the 7 warlords of the sea. You can continue to make trouble, challenge Whitebeard, or even challenge Roger, I won't care. I can even guarantee that the Navy and the world government will not trouble you. But remember one thing, you don't obey the orders of the Navy, nor the orders of the world government, you only obey my orders. Crocodile was struck by lightning when he heard this, and his pupils shook violently. This guy, what a huge ambition. It seems you understand. Darren smiled, took out a brand new gold-plated cigar from his pocket, put it in Crocodile's mouth, and lit it for him. Then he helped Crocodile to tidy up his slicked-back hairstyle, and then slowly stood up. Under Crocodile's stunned expression, the Vice Admiral of the Navy showed a brilliant and mocking smile. Then, congratulations, Crocodile. From this moment on, you are the Honorable King Shichibukai. Chapter 79 Further Planning. Tap tap tap. A tense and dense sound of footsteps came from the coast from far to near. At this time, Kaji's warships finally arrived. Hundreds of Navy soldiers rushed over with vigilant expressions, holding long spears in their hands, and launched an offensive camp, with their guns aimed at Crocodile's figure at the same time. But when they saw the scene clearly, each of them was stunned on the spot. Didn't they say that the target was extremely powerful and wiped out an elite unit of their navy in less than a few minutes? How was it stepped on by Vice Admiral Darren? This is too fast. Let's go. Darren slowly stood up, released his foot from Crocodile's chest, and relit a cigar. A happy smile slowly appeared on his face. A Navy soldier walked over quickly and held a brand new military uniform with both hands in admiration. Darren took the uniform and put it on, and put on a Navy cloak. He glanced at the clear blue sky in the distance and said with a smile, "Today's weather is really good. Kaji. You are the only one who thinks the weather is good." He took a few gulps of water, and his body had returned to normal at this time. He was no longer shriveled like a living dead, and he got up from the ground. "Are we leaving like this?" Kaji glanced at Crocodile cautiously and asked in a low voice. Darren shrugged. "What else? He is now the noble Shichibukai. Before the title is taken away, our navy can't do anything to him." Kaji's mouth twitched. "By the way, someone come and bandage our Shichibukai-sama, otherwise he will bleed to death, which would be fun." Darren casually ordered, and then strode towards the coast. Watching Darren lead a group of Navy officers to leave in a domineering manner, Crocodile gritted his teeth, and his bloodshot eyes almost cracked. It took half an hour before he barely recovered some strength and struggled to sit up from the ground. There was no one around, and all the Navy officers had evacuated. The severed left hand had stopped bleeding at this time, and the wound was simply bandaged and medicated to avoid infection. Crocodile stared at his broken wrist blankly, and suddenly roared angrily. "Damn Navy!" Boom! The vast yellow sand rushed into the sky, turning into a huge crocodile that covered the sky and the sun, opening its bloody mouth to swallow up the entire town that had turned into ruins. The warship set sail again. The sea breeze was cool and the sun was bright. Darren stood alone at the bow, biting a cigar in his mouth, his hands folded across his chest, quietly blowing the sea breeze. Kaji had long since hidden in the cabin and taken a deep nap. Although a large amount of water replenishment could alleviate Crocodile's tricks, a large amount of water loss in a short period of time would still cause considerable harm to the human body, and sufficient rest would be required to fully recover. Other Navy soldiers performed their duties faithfully, sensibly staying away from the bow, leaving enough personal space for their great Vice Admiral Darren. The 7 warlords of the sea. Darren fell into deep thought, slowly exhaled a long stream of smoke, and whispered softly. His eyes gradually narrowed into dangerous slits, and he took out a den-den mushi from his arms and dialed a signal. Bulu bulu, bulu bulu. A few seconds later, the den-den mushi communication was connected. Godfather. A sinister and hoarse voice came from the den-den mushi, which was the voice of Doflamingo. Darren smiled and said calmly. Dover, how have you been these days? Are you okay? The other side of the den-den mushi. North Sea, Lubeck Island. The lobby of the Don Quixote family residence. Doflamingo looked at the den-den mushi in front of him with an uncertain expression and said slowly. Thank you for your concern, Godfather. Everything is fine here. He paused and said. I have seen the raid on Wangguo by the Godfather a few days ago. Congratulations, Godfather. Darren's voice came with a smile. With your wisdom, you should know that this is just a deterrent action and it is not worthy of such praise. Doflamingo said slowly. Despite this, it is enough to open people's eyes. I wonder if the Godfather contacted me this time for something. Indeed, there is such a thing. Dover, have you heard of the 7 warlords of the sea plan? Darren said. 7 warlords of the sea. Doflamingo frowned and shook his head. I don't know. Darren explained briefly and then said seriously. The government is now determining the candidates for the 7 warlords of the sea. If you can become one of the 7 warlords of the sea, it will be extremely beneficial to your future development. You will not need to hide in the dark, but will officially step onto the stage, have a legal identity, and become one of the government's designated pirates. This is a good opportunity, Dover. Hearing this, Doflamingo's eyes under his sunglasses suddenly burst into a hot light. With his intelligence and vision, he instantly judged the huge potential and value of the title of Seven Warlords of the Sea, from Darren's words. "Godfather, what do I need to do?" Doflamingo suppressed his inner excitement, clenched his hands into fists, and asked in a low voice with a low tone. Darren smiled and said, "I tried to submit your name, but the 5 elders refused." Doflamingo's pupils shrank slightly when he heard this. 5 elders. Darren, with his power and status in the Navy, is he qualified to talk directly to the 5 old immortals? For a moment, Doflamingo was in doubt. But soon, he remembered his past with the 5 elders. The hateful and arrogant faces of the 5 old men appeared in his mind. Doflamingo's eyes were filled with hatred. He clenched his fists tighter, his finger bones turned blue, his nails sank deep into the skin, and even cut the flesh and blood. The reason they refused is that you are just a small pirate in the North Sea. Whether in terms of strength or reputation, you are not enough to bear the title of the 7 Warlords of the Sea. Darren said with a sly smile. It's this kind of contemptuous attitude and tone again. Doflamingo gritted his teeth and roared. Then Godfather, what should I do to take off the title of Shichibukai? On the other side of Den Den Mushi, the smile on Darren's face became deeper. Yes, it was this kind of hatred and anger. Dover, you should know very well that the reason why the 5 elders refused is not as simple as strength and reputation. Doflamingo was stunned and gritted his teeth in silence. He understood what Darren meant. Since he had been expelled from the ranks of the Celestial Dragons, the 5 elders would never give him the title of Shichibukai. They regarded him as a traitor. This means, they despised themselves, even more than ordinary people. But Dover, this does not mean that we have no room for maneuver here. I have a fever due to the flu, so I'm typing hard. In addition, I have to do something big today, and another chapter will be late. I'm proposing. Chapter 80 Godfather. Oh, what does Godfather mean? Doflamingo couldn't help but raise his eyebrows when he heard this. Darren smiled and said, the so-called candidates for the 7 Warlords of the Sea by the world government are actually limited to the silver medalists on this sea. Those guys who stand at the top will never accept the government's amnesty. We can't affect the selection range of the world government, but we can narrow the selection range. To the point where they have no choice. The moment the last sentence fell, Doflamingo felt a chill on his spine. I don't know if it's an illusion, even if he is thousands of miles away from Darren by using Den Den Mushi communication, he seems to be able to feel the suffocating murderous intent and arrogance in Darren's voice. That's right, it's killing. No matter who you choose, as long as it doesn't meet Darren's wishes, he will kill that person silently. The most terrifying thing is that with Darren's current strength and high mobility, this is definitely not empty talk. Remove the extra weeds, and the one that stands out in the end will definitely be the beautiful rose. Darren said with a half smile. Dover, this is your chance. Doflamingo took a deep breath, and fell silent for a while, not knowing what to say. This man's domineering, vision and madness, even the arrogance of daring to obey the orders of the world government, even he, a born, bad seed, couldn't help but be shocked by it. Doflamingo couldn't help but light a cigarette, took a deep puff, and then slowly said. But, even if that's the case, those 5 old immortals still refuse to give me the title of Shichibukai. No, Dover, you got a very important thing wrong. Darren's mouth gradually raised a wanton arc. My godson never needs charity from others. We don't need the 5 elders to give us the title of Shichibukai. Remember, you are my Rogers Darren's godson. We just need to grab what we like. Doflamingo, his breathing suddenly stagnated. Grab it. How to grab it? As a former celestial dragon, although he had long since left the aristocratic core of the world government, Doflamingo knew the foundation and strength of the world government better than anyone else. That group of useless pig celestial dragons could stand on the Red Earth continent for hundreds of years without falling. It was definitely not luck, but there was a real reason. The authority of the world government cannot be questioned or challenged. Doflamingo himself has long experienced this. Godfather, I don't understand what you mean. This kid is still too young. Darren laughed in his heart. Dover, for people living on this sea, absolute strength is of course the most important. But in addition, we must also learn to take advantage of the situation. Take advantage of the situation. Yes, take advantage of the situation. Darren smoked a cigar and talked freely. You have an advantage that no one else on this sea has, and that is your blood. Your body flows with the noble, supreme, world noble celestial dragon blood. Even if the 5 elders have deprived you of your celestial dragon identity, this is an unchangeable and undeniable fact. Hearing this, Doflamingo seemed to have grasped something, and a gleam of light flashed under his sunglasses. Godfather, please continue. This, Godfather, is getting easier and easier to call. Darren smiled and continued. As long as you can make good use of your identity, many seemingly difficult problems will be solved. Many things that are impossible for others will be easy. Then it's back to the original question. In your opinion, what is the biggest weakness, or weakness of the world government? The weakness of the world government. Doflamingo was stunned. A behemoth that hovers at the top of the world, can there really be weaknesses? His brain was working quickly. Doflamingo knew very well that this was Darren's guidance, or test. This domineering man definitely doesn't need incompetent trash under his command. If I can't give a good answer, I'm afraid he will lower his expectations of me. The moment this thought came up, Doflamingo somehow felt an elusive panic in his heart. He quickened his thinking speed, his brain worked rapidly, and began to dig deep in his mind. Countless information about the world government rushed into his brain frantically. Soon, a layer of fine cold sweat gradually seeped out on Doflamingo's forehead. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Half a minute. A full minute of silence passed, and Doflamingo's back was wet with cold sweat without him realizing it. Suddenly. Gold in the sky. He stood up from the sofa suddenly, blurted out, exclaimed, his face full of disbelief. That's right. Darren smiled with satisfaction. With Darren's confirmation, Doflamingo's pupils shrank to the extreme in an instant. Then. Ying. He suddenly laughed wildly with his head raised, his fingers bent. Because of excessive excitement, his body couldn't help shaking. Gold in the sky! Exclamation mark quote. Yes! Exclamation mark quote. Why didn't I think of that? Exclamation mark quote. The weakness of the world government, the weakness of that bunch of pigs and trash, is the heavenly gold. Exclamation mark quote. As long as I rob the heavenly gold, even if those 5 old men don't like me, they will have to give me the title of 7 warlords of the sea under political pressure. Exclamation mark quote. The most important thing is that I am a celestial dragon. The supreme celestial dragon. Even if they rob the heavenly gold, they dare not do anything to me. Exclamation mark quote. The most important thing is that I am a celestial dragon. The supreme celestial dragon. Even if they rob the heavenly gold, they dare not do anything to me. Exclamation mark quote. The most important thing is that I understand. Doflamingo laughed more and more crazily, and the domineering aura on his body burst out unconsciously, sweeping up gusts of wind in the entire empty meeting hall. If Darren was here, he would probably be surprised to find that the strength of Doflamingo's domineering aura suddenly increased by at least 10 points at this moment. Very good, you finally understand. You are worthy of being my most trusted godson. Darren smiled with satisfaction. But don't be too anxious about this matter. The first thing you need to do now is another thing. Doflamingo quickly restrained his smile and said in a deep voice. Godfather, please speak. This time, unlike the previous hypocrisy, the address was actually full of respect. Darren smiled and said. Go out of the North Sea, my godson. He paused. I'll wait for you in the New World. As soon as the voice fell, the Den Mushi communication was interrupted. On the warship. Darren put away the Den Mushi and exhaled a puff of smoke comfortably. He stood there, his hands in his pockets, looking up at the sky, his expression arrogant and unruly. Suddenly, an interesting idea flashed through his mind. The so-called King, Shichibukai, are they not the King of the North Sea? Shichibukai. She said, I do. Thank you for your blessings. Fever and marriage proposal can't prevent me from updating normally. Chapter 81 The Obedient King. North Sea. Lubeck Island. Blue. The Den Den Mushi in front of him slowly fell asleep. Doflamingo leaned back and sat on the soft leather sofa, with a strange cold light flashing under his sunglasses, and a ferocious smile on the corner of his mouth, which lasted for a long time. What happened? Dover. Why did the Conqueror hockey suddenly burst out? At this time, Trebol and other cadres rushed in a panic, posing as if facing a great enemy, and looked around. After finding that there was no enemy, they breathed a sigh of relief. It's okay, don't be nervous. Doflamingo glanced at them, smiled, and lit a cigar for himself. Seeing their young master sitting there like nothing happened, Torebel and several others looked at each other. I say, Dover, did something happen? Torebel asked cautiously. He could see that Doflamingo seemed different today and was in an unusually good mood. Doflamingo exhaled a long stream of smoke, pondered for a second, and suddenly said, "How is our Don Quixote family's business in the North Sea now?" Hearing this question, Torebel thought for a while, counting on his fingers. Everything is going well. The cooperation with Germa 66 has also officially started under the matchmaking of the Flying Squirrel guy. Soon our family members will be able to equip some of Germa 66's technological weapons. In addition, in the past year, gambling, usury, arms trade, customs and other businesses have achieved at least 50% growth. The most important point is that the leaders and nobles of many countries in the North Sea have begun to accept the status of our Don Quixote family in the North Sea and have started to trade with us. Diamante, who was dressed strangely, also laughed. As for cooperation with the underground world, business is booming. Especially the so-called underground emperors of the shipping king Umit, who are cooperating more and more closely with us. These businesses alone can bring us at least 2 billion Baileys in profit every month. 2 billion Baileys in net profit every month, more than 20 billion Baileys in a year. This is an astronomical figure in this era before inflation. 20 billion Baileys is even the annual tax revenue of some small island countries. It can be said without hesitation that with such income, Doflamingo can completely form a small fleet with strong strength. Of course, according to the Friendly Cooperation Agreement between the Don Quixote family and the North Sea Fleet, half of the profit of more than 20 billion will flow into the hands of the North Sea Fleet through various secret channels. Even so, the remaining 10 billion Baileys is still an unimaginable amount of money for a mafia pirate group. After hearing the reports from everyone, Doflamingo smiled and said slowly, "It seems that our business in the North Sea is indeed developing very well. More than very good. We have almost lived a life like aristocrats." Pika laughed sharply. "That's right, Dover, you didn't see. The politicians and nobles of those countries, after seeing the logo of our Don Quixote family, their originally arrogant appearances were directly trembling with fear." Diamante laughed strangely, with a proud face. "We finally achieved our original goal. We are living a life of superiority." The snot under Torebol's nostrils shook with excitement. But Doflamingo's next words froze the proud smiles on their faces. "In that case, we should leave the North Sea," Doflamingo said lightly. Leave the North Sea." Trebol and others couldn't help but stare at Doflamingo in disbelief. They finally laid a foundation in the North Sea, experienced so many hardships and fled in a hurry, and came to the current position, with fame, wealth, power and status that they had never had before. They haven't had time to enjoy it yet, and they have to leave the North Sea. Everyone looked at each other, hesitant, but because of Doflamingo's majesty, they didn't dare to speak for a while. The atmosphere suddenly became stiff. "What's wrong?" Doflamingo looked at them expressionlessly. Everyone was frightened by his cold eyes and swallowed their saliva together. Finally, it was Trebol who spoke hesitantly. "Well, I say, Dover, we have just started our rule in the North Sea. Isn't it too hasty to leave in such a hurry?" "Haste?" Doflamingo raised a self-deprecating smile at the corner of his mouth. "It's not hasty at all." His eyes drooped, and no emotion could be discerned. "He even disliked me for walking too slowly. Who dares to dislike you? Let's go kill him. Pika screamed murderously. Doflamingo said lightly. Rogers Darren. Pika's voice was stuck in his throat, and his expression was stiff. Seeing them like this, Doflamingo couldn't help shaking his head and sighing. I know you all miss everything in the North Sea. Yes, compared to our wandering life at the beginning, we are now living a very comfortable life. But all this is short-lived, and you should know it in your heart. After hearing this, everyone was silent. They couldn't refute it. Before meeting Doflamingo, each of them was born as a gangster and a villain, and lived a life of misfortune by robbing, stealing, cheating and other despicable means. But when they saw Doflamingo, when they personally felt Doflamingo's innate spirit, they saw an opportunity in the latter. They wholeheartedly worship him as king, but at the same time, it is also to make themselves live a good life. It is human nature to be greedy for comfort. Doflamingo did not blame them. One day we will leave the North Sea. Of course we can be greedy for comfort, but this sea does not wait for anyone, and this era does not wait for anyone. Darren. No, my godfather just told me that the government is now planning a plan for the 7 warlords of the sea, and I intend to compete for the title of 7 warlords of the sea. Doflamingo slowly stood up, and the pink feather coat behind him danced wildly without wind as his momentum continued to rise. A strong sense of oppression and the majestic aura of the superior came to his face. My family, the godfather has pointed out a path for us. And now, it's time for us to take back everything we have lost. Trebol and others were shocked, knelt on one knee, and said sincerely. Yes, young master. But they all had the same thought. Dover is becoming more and more obedient to that navy. Thanks for all your blessings. Chapter 82 The Golden Lions Movement. One day later. The first half of the Grand Line, the Navy Headquarters, Marineford. The warship docked. This is Commodore Kaji's warship. Salute. As the messenger shouted, all the patrolling Navy soldiers on the huge oval naval port stopped their actions and saluted together. The bordering board fell. Kaji walked down from the warship with his hands in his pockets, looking at the rows of eager Navy on the naval port, made a gesture of a leader inspecting, waved and smiled modestly. This is too grand, I just went to the New World to collect intelligence. His smile suddenly froze there. Because a team of elite Navy officers with hurried expressions passed by him and walked towards Darren, who was walking slowly down the deck. Vice Admiral Darren, you are finally back. Marshal Kong Gangu and Admiral Zhang Guo. And a group of high-ranking Navy officers are already waiting in the conference room. The leading brigadier saluted Darren solemnly and said in a deep voice. Darren smiled and said softly, sorry for the long wait. Please lead the way. Salute. At this time, the loud voice of the messenger came out again. All the Navy soldiers present raised their hands and saluted again. But it was obvious that the target of their salute this time was not Kaji, but Darren. Kaji. The corner of his eye twitched, and suddenly he took a step forward and walked to the brigadier general, pointed at his face, and laughed. What about me? General Zhang Guo and the others have been waiting for me for a long time, right? It's okay, I don't need you to lead the way. I go to the marshal's mansion often and I'm very familiar with the road. The brigadier general glanced at him, and his tone suddenly became ritualistic and indifferent, and he said lightly. I'm sorry, Brigadier General Cake, the scale of this military meeting is that generals with the rank of Major General and above in the headquarters are required to attend. You don't need to attend this meeting. Cake. Damn it, I'm a naval brigadier general after all. He shouted angrily. The brigadier general paused. Who isn't? Cake. Ah. Marshal's mansion. Led by the Commodore, Darren felt a solemn and murderous atmosphere as soon as he entered the military conference room. On the exaggerated oval conference table, dozens of officers of the rank of Major General or above from the Navy headquarters were all present, staring at the simulated sand table in front of them with a solemn look. The moment the door of the conference room opened, the eyes of dozens of generals were cast at the same time, giving people an indescribable weight. However, Darren was calm and composed, with a relaxed smile on his face. Wow, it's so lively. The serious-looking Kong Kong frowned. The corner of the mouth of the crane staff twitched. Zhang Guo covered his face in pain. Everyone. Hurry up and take a seat, Vice Admiral Darren. We are all waiting for you. Kong Kong said in a deep voice. Yes, Marshal Kong. Darren responded and glanced at the empty seats left and right. Hey, Darren, this way. I've saved a seat for you. Kuzan, who was sitting in the corner, stood up excitedly, waved to Darren, and pointed to the seat next to him. This seat is it up. It's convenient for you to smoke. Everyone. Zhang Guo put his hand on his heart. Darren smiled and said, okay. No, Lieutenant General Darren, please sit next to me. Your opinion is very important in this meeting. At this time, Kong suddenly spoke. Darren was startled and agreed happily. He walked to Kong's right and sat down in the empty seat. This was originally the seat for Mr. Zepha. Darren observed the round table and quickly came to this conclusion. As the Admiral of the Navy, Kong sat in the main seat. On his left was the Admiral of the Navy headquarters, Sengoku, and then Sakazuki, Borsellino and other Vice Admirals of the headquarters in a series of battle sequences. And on the right-hand side of Marshal Kong, it should have been the position of former Admiral Zepha, and then Vice Admiral Crane and other staff, civilian personnel and idle people, like Garp who were just passing the time. So in this way, Darren sat directly between Kong and Crane. However, as soon as he sat down, Darren suddenly felt a cold chill emanating from his side. Darren, I heard that you had a lot of fun in Fun Street these days. Darren was startled, turned his head and looked. What caught his eyes was the cold eyes of the Crane staff officer who was interrogating a prisoner. Ahem. Darren coughed twice, and a hint of embarrassment flashed across his face. How did his story in Happy Street get out? Damn it. Did that bastard Kaji betray me? Fortunately, Guion is only a brigadier general of the headquarters and is not qualified to attend this meeting. Just as he was thinking about how to fool around, Steelbone Kong tapped the table with his thick knuckles and directly opened the meeting agenda. Then, all the people in this meeting have attended. He raised his head, looked at everyone present with a cold look, and said in a deep voice. All the contents of this meeting will be included in the highest level of military secrets of the headquarters. Anyone who leaks it will be severely dealt with. Yes, Marshal Kong. Everyone present said loudly at the same time. Very good, then. Steelbone Sora looked at Sengoku and signaled with his eyes, Sengoku, let's start. Sengoku nodded, stood up from his seat, and waved his hand. With a swish, the video Den Den Mushi that had been prepared long ago immediately projected a series of thrilling pictures on the giant screen of the conference room. Towns turned to ashes, island terrain was destroyed, countless refugees were displaced, and corpses were lying in the ruins. Sengoku's sad and solemn voice slowly sounded. A few days ago, the legendary pirate Shiki the Golden Lion reappeared on the sea. He has successfully rebuilt a flying fleet of tens of thousands of people, with at least 30 pirate ships under his command, and carried out large-scale destruction and massacres in some countries and islands in the New World. Attack, destroy, kill. The Golden Lion led his flying pirate group to launch a crazy action. But after investigation, we found a very strange phenomenon. Most of these attacked islands and towns are not wealthy places. The most important point is that the flying pirates did not plunder any wealth and resources in these places. This also means that the purpose of the Golden Lion series of actions is not plunder. When these words came out, the faces of the generals present changed slightly. The essence of pirates is plunder. If a large-scale pirate group attacks towns and islands without large-scale plunder, it can only be said that what they are pursuing is far more valuable than gold and silver treasures. Chapter 83 Golden Lion changes career to archaeology. This thought makes all the Navy commanders present shudder. No one understands Golden Lion's madness better than the Navy. This pirate who was generously named Legend by the Warring States Admiral is so terrifying and dangerous that he even surpasses Roger and Whitebeard to some extent, not to mention Kaido and Big Mom. He regards human life as worthless and does whatever it takes to achieve his goal. He is cruel, decisive in killing, and even regards his subordinates as expendable. Tool. The madness, arrogance and recklessness of the Flying Admiral have been fully demonstrated in the Battle of Marineford not long ago. After all, even Whitebeard and Roger have a bottom line in their actions. But Golden Lion doesn't. Every time Golden Lion appears on the sea, it will inevitably cause a bloody storm. This time, he led the fleet to attack major towns, islands and ports frantically, but not for the looting of wealth and materials. What is his goal? So what does this guy want to do? Sakazuki suddenly said in a hoarse voice, and the cold murderous intent came to his face as soon as he opened his mouth. Zhang shook his head and said solemnly. It has not been found out yet. The actions and trajectories of the flying fleet are difficult to predict. Golden Lion's personality is even more moody and unpredictable. And based on my understanding of Shichi. He paused, his eyebrows knitted tightly. Perhaps a large part of the targets he attacked are smoke bombs. Smoke bombs. So General Zhang, what you mean is that the Golden Lion guy will deliberately attack towns and islands that are not related to his goals to confuse our Navy's tracking and investigation, in order to cover up his true purpose. A veteran vice admiral of the headquarters I couldn't help asking. Zhang nodded. Yes, this possibility cannot be ruled out. After Zhang confirmation, everyone's heart suddenly became heavy, and they all sat there with sad faces, helpless. Seeing this scene, Zhang and Gang Ji Yukong looked at each other subconsciously, and both saw the solemnity in each other's eyes. This is where the Golden Lion is difficult to deal with. Insidious and cunning means, difficult to defend abilities, unparalleled hard power. It is no exaggeration to say that he is definitely the most dangerous and difficult pirate in this sea. And in fact, it is true. Since the Battle of God Valley that year, the group of unruly guys who came out of Rock's ship have almost all developed into famous pirates who dominate one side. Wang Ji, who occupies Beehive Island, Flame Flower, the former emperor of Amazon Lily, Bakingham, who once joined the illegal research team of Mads. Big Katakana Middle. Mom, who established the 10,000 Nations, Kaido, who entered Wano country, Whitebeard, who has a huge territory and fleet. Although these guys are the remnants of Rock's pirates like Golden Lion, their threat to the world and the Navy is far less than that of Golden Lion. Every time Golden Lion moves, their Navy is led by the nose. This passive feeling is very uncomfortable. That guy seems to be looking for some clues. At this time, a calm voice suddenly broke the deadlock. Everyone raised their heads and looked in the direction of the sound. Darren, who was sitting there with his legs crossed, was smiling and taking out a cigar, and Kuzan next to him was enthusiastically handing him a lighter. Seeing this scene, the corners of Zhang mouth twitched. However, he still suppressed his emotions and asked patiently. Looking for clues. Darren, what do you know? Darren lit a cigar, took a puff, and smiled. I don't know either. But please take a look at the islands attacked by the Golden Lion. He pointed to the huge simulated sand table in front of him. The islands, towns and ports attacked by the Golden Lion have all been planted with small red flags. In the past few days, Golden Lion has attacked a total of 16 locations. Darren was talking while puffing out smoke. Among them, 8 locations such as Ross Ancient Town, Sleeping Valley, and Rising Island are remote, economically backward and poor. Even if Golden Lion wants to create smoke bombs to confuse our Navy's vision, he should choose a prosperous and wealthy country, not such a small town and island. After all, if you want to create a gorgeous trick, the bigger the target, the better the effect. Steel Bone Kong's eyes flashed, and he couldn't help asking. So Darren, based on your understanding and judgment of Golden Lion, what is his purpose in attacking these locations? Hearing this, everyone present understood. Why did Marshal Kong let Darren sit next to him at the beginning and attend this military meeting with a very high standard? Nothing else, just because Vice Admiral Darren is the only one in the existing Navy who has repeatedly thwarted Golden Lion's conspiracy with his strategy and ability. If there is anyone in the Navy who is most familiar with and understands this crazy guy Golden Lion, it is definitely Darren. Darren turned his head and nodded to Kong, smiling. Reporting to Marshal Kong, a more accurate way to put this question is, what are the common characteristics of these places? In addition to poverty, backwardness, and sparse population, these places actually have another very important connection point. That is, they have an ancient history and some illusory legends. He pointed to one of the places on the sand table. Ross Ancient Town, this place has been circulating stories about demons for hundreds of years. Sleepy Valley, this town with unique topography has a history dating back 2,000 years. Shanghai Island, with an upwelling current similar to the upside-down mountain, is a great wonder of the New World. The other places are similar. Darren smiled, with a gleam in his eyes. He seems to be looking for some ancient historical clues, and trying to find traces in these illusory legends and wonders. Hearing this, Kuzan stared at Darren with admiration, his eyes shining. Darren is so amazing. How do you know these things? Sakazuki couldn't help but look at Darren more. The naval commanders present were also surprised and stared at Darren in amazement. Lieutenant General Darren's profound knowledge is simply beyond ordinary people. Darren looked at everyone with some doubts. The after-class supplementary reading materials of the cultural class of the Naval Training Camp, the overview of world geography and history. Haven't you read it? Everyone. They are all here to serve as Navy soldiers to kill pirates. Who would really study cultural classes so seriously? And it's the after-class reading supplementary materials. Yes, I have seen it. After all, many of us graduated from the training camp. Yes. It's just that I didn't remember it at the moment. Yes. Vice Admiral Darren is indeed the chief. The generals present said with some embarrassment. Garp quietly moved to the side of Sengoku, poked him with his finger, and whispered. Sengoku, do you know this knowledge? Sengoku blushed, coughed lightly, and said with his chest straightened. Well, of course I know it. You know it but you don't say it, huh? Garp muttered. Sengoku. So. Borsellino glanced at Darren at this time, and said with a teasing smile. It seems that our great pirate has given up the business of plundering and switched to being an archaeologist. What exactly does he want to find from ancient history and legends? The speaker seems unintentional, but the listener is intentional. After hearing what Darren and Borsellino said, Gangu Kong and Zongguo's faces changed slightly, and their pupils shrank. They seemed to remember something bad. Chapter 84 Don't Guess the Navy. In an instant, Zongguo and Gangu Kong had roughly formed an idea in their hearts. So Darren, in your opinion, what about the other places? Do these places have any common characteristics? Zongguo's mind turned, and he stopped talking about this topic and asked. Darren smiled, knowing that Zongguo had noticed something, so he stopped talking about it and answered. The remaining 7 attacked places are all ports and neutral islands with population circulation. These places are often places where a large amount of intelligence circulates, and they also involve underground black markets. I speculate that the Golden Lion attacked these places to obtain relevant intelligence. Hearing Darren's answer, Zongguo nodded thoughtfully. At this time, Gang Ji Yukong suddenly said. Since the specific goal of Golden Lion cannot be determined for the time being, let's study the combat power of the fleet under Golden Lion first. Zongguo nodded immediately and said. Yes, on this point. Lieutenant General Darren, you should have a say. Hearing this, everyone present turned their eyes to Darren with deep conviction. Hey, don't look at me with such eyes. I am under a lot of pressure like this. Darren sighed helplessly. The eyes of these naval generals looking at him were simply, you have annihilated the Golden Lion's fleet once, it's not too much to do it again. What the hell is this? The more capable, the more work. The last time I was able to annihilate the Golden Lion's flying fleet, it was really a lot of luck. Even if I have the same conditions now, it is difficult to replicate the previous success again. Darren knows his own business. The reason why he was able to completely destroy the Golden Lion's fleet last time was because he had gathered several unique factors. The special environment on the Coin Island added and amplified his devil fruit ability. Golden Lion's pride and arrogance made him lower his fleet's floating altitude to a range of ground-to-air strikes. The most important thing is the information gap before and after caught Golden Lion off guard. The simultaneous appearance of the three key factors allowed Darren to achieve such an amazing record in the Battle of Coin Island. This cannot be replicated. Golden Lion is not the kind of idiot who falls into the same pit twice. With the lesson from the last time, he will definitely be on guard. Then, Lieutenant General Darren, where is the knife? At this time, a major general in his early 30s asked Darren cautiously. Darren shook his head again. Yanmo does have an impeccable large-scale destructive strike capability, but it has no effect on Golden Lion. Before Yanmo smashes his fleet, he will definitely intercept it directly. And by the same token, Yanmo's power has been exposed, and Golden Lion cannot be unprepared. Hearing this, Gang Ji Yukong groaned in silence, and Zhongguo frowned. The other naval commanders fell silent, with solemn expressions. It's ridiculous. At this time, a hoarse, cold voice suddenly sounded. Everyone was stunned. I saw Sakazuki, who had remained silent since the beginning of the meeting, slowly raised his head and scanned the faces of everyone on the scene with an expressionless face. Each of us is a corps commander of the headquarters, but we put all the pressure on Darren. There was a trace of mocking smile in his gloomy eyes. If you don't even have the courage to fight to the death on the battlefield, why don't you take the initiative to submit your resignation? As soon as this remark came out, it immediately caused dissatisfaction among many naval officers present. Sakazuki, what do you mean by this? We have served as vice admirals of the headquarters for much longer than you. You have just been promoted to vice admiral, what qualifications do you have to say such things? The Golden Lion's fleet is known to be invincible, without the ability to fly, what can we use to fight him? Hospitality and anger surged like a tide. Enough. Kong Kong knocked on the table unhappily. Now is not the time for us to fight among ourselves. Everyone immediately stopped talking and dared not say anything. Kong Kong pinched his temple and said thoughtfully. Although Sakazuki's words are a bit extreme, his starting point is correct. It is the mission of all our navy to defeat the flying pirates. It should not be undertaken by Vice Admiral Darren alone. Sengoku. He looked at Sengoku. Tell me about that. Sengoku nodded and said in a deep voice. Although the specific target of Golden Lion has not been found out yet, the relevant intelligence investigation shows that the arms channel of the fleet led by Golden Lion all comes from the same force. He looked at Darren. The Beast's pirates, Kaido. Darren, please briefly explain the situation of the Beast's pirates and Kaido. Darren raised his eyebrows. It turned out that the arms channel of Golden Lion came from Kaido, no wonder Dover didn't react at all. After all, normally, Golden Lion would need a lot of arms to rebuild its fleet, which would inevitably cause turmoil in the underground black market arms smuggling trade, and Dover couldn't have been unaware of it. Now it seems that Golden Lion has become Kaido's largest buyer. Darren thought about it, so he briefly talked about Kaido's situation in Wano country. What? Kaido actually controlled Wano country. Damn it. Are they going to form an alliance again? Quote. The Navy commanders were shocked by the news and worried at the same time. At this moment, a messenger ran in with sweat all over his head and saluted in panic. Report. The latest intelligence. The great pirate Golden Lion led his fleet again and appeared in the New World waters. We intercepted the relevant Den Den Mushi communication. We are analyzing the next target of Golden Lion's attack. Hearing the messenger's outburst, everyone was shocked and looked at the huge simulated sand table in front of them. Steelbone Kong and Sengoku's brains started to work quickly, and their eyes kept scanning the sea chart sand table. Where will the target of Golden Lion's attack next? Bulu Bulu. Bulu Bulu. Suddenly, a quick Den Den Mushi call sounded. Sorry. Warring States said, frowned, took out a military Den Den Mushi from his arms, and pressed the connect button. A burst of noise, panic and explosions came out intermittently from the Den Den Mushi. Help! Help! Request! Support! Golden Lion! This is... The voice in the Den Den Mushi gradually became lower, drowned out by the wailing and explosions. Warring states held the Den Den Mushi motionlessly, stunned. Others looked at warring states in confusion. The decoding was successful. Another messenger rushed in a panic, his face pale, and said, "Golden Lion's target of attack is the G14 branch." After the words fell, all the Navy officers present were stunned, as if struck by lightning. They suddenly reacted and stared at the Den Den Mushi in Sengoku's hand. At this time, the face of the Den Den Mushi suddenly changed, and the expression became unruly and cruel. A hoarse, arrogant and sinister laugh came from it. "Don't guess, Navy. You can't guess what I want to do. Also, don't try to plant spies in my pirate group again. This time is just a small punishment. Otherwise, next time I will destroy more than just a small branch. By the way, this deterrent method is really useful. I have to thank that Darren kid for giving me inspiration. Ha 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 ha. Kaga." The communication of Den Den Mushi was interrupted. In the conference room, there was a dead silence. Chapter 85 Ancient Weapons. In the huge conference room, the atmosphere was extremely oppressive. It was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. All the naval commanders present were stunned, standing still like a sculpture, with pale faces. They stared at the sleeping military Den Den Mushi with horrified expressions and remained silent for a long time. Until 2 seconds later, a lazy and slow teasing voice broke the dead silence. "It's really terrible, Shiki the Golden Lion actually discovered the spy who infiltrated our navy." Borsellino scratched his head helplessly. "Damn it." Zongguo slammed his fist on the conference table, with a strong anger in his eyes. "The bastard Jin Shizi actually destroyed one of their branches just to threaten their navy. Although the Navy G14 branch is just a marginal branch deployed by the Navy in the New World, it is very small and far less than other naval branches, but there are at least 500 naval troops stationed there. From the time their spies sent the encrypted message to the time they deciphered the signal, it took less than a minute, and Jin Shizi destroyed the entire G14 branch. This terrifying action and threat power is simply frightening. And the most infuriating thing is that this way of deterrence by surprise attack. Their navy has just used it for a few days." Thinking of this, a group of naval generals subconsciously looked at the Navy Vice Admiral who was sitting there calmly smoking a cigar. Hey, you can't see me." Darren bit his cigar and raised his hands, saying helplessly, "This has nothing to do with me." Everyone rolled their eyes, but said nothing. This matter really can't be blamed on Darren. Golden Lion's action and madness are like this, and it is precisely because of this reason that he is more feared and more difficult to deal with than other pirates on this sea. Darren, do you have any way to restrict Golden Lion? Giant Bone Kong pinched his temples and looked at Darren with a frown. Darren shook his head and said helplessly, "I'm sorry, Marshal Kong. Golden Lion has no fixed territory and sphere of influence. His flying fleet is elusive. Conventional methods can't have any effect on Golden Lion at all." Everyone's eyes darkened when they heard this. At a loss. Seeing this, Kong Gangu pondered for a moment, stood up slowly, and gave an order. "In this case, let's pass the order down. Shrink the defense circle in the near future, reduce intelligence gathering and espionage, so as not to provoke the Golden Lion. Let's end this meeting here. Zongguo, Darren, Sakaski, Borsellino, Garp. And Kuzan, you guys stay for the time being." He waved his hand, looking a little tired. "Yes, Marshal Kong." All the other generals stood up at the same time, raised their hands and saluted, and then left the meeting room with worried faces. Everyone was worried, with a dark cloud on their faces. Facing the madman Golden Lion, even the Navy had no good solution. When everyone left the meeting room and the door closed again, Kong Gangu looked at Darren who was smoking calmly again, and said with a serious look. "Darren, you said that conventional methods are useless. Then what about unconventional methods?" Hearing this, the eyes of others widened slightly. Marshal Kong asked this, does Darren really have any other way to restrict the Golden Lion? Especially Zongguo, he became a little excited, staring at Darren with burning eyes. "You guys are like this, I am under a lot of pressure." Darren scratched his head in embarrassment. Golden Lion's own strength is there. He can come and go freely in the world. As long as he is not seeking death, who can limit him? I am just a vice admiral of the headquarters. What ability do I have to limit Golden Lion? Kimbolt glanced at him and suddenly said, I promise you a seat as a candidate for admiral. Darren's expression became serious and he said seriously. But then again, as a navy, no matter what position I am in, I must practice justice, so as not to disappoint the trust of the people and colleagues in me. Warring States. Crane. A smile appeared on the corner of Borsellino's mouth. Sakaski narrowed his eyes. Kuzan opened his mouth and was dumbfounded. Garp laughed. The corner of Kong Gang's mouth twitched, and he said unhappily. If you have any method, tell me quickly. Darren coughed twice, thought for a few seconds and said slowly. It's not possible to fight Golden Lion directly. That guy has suffered several losses at the hands of our navy. He will become more cautious in a short period of time. It is for this reason that he attacked the G-14 branch to warn our navy. But what he doesn't know is that it was this action that exposed him. Oh, how do you say it? Zhongguo suddenly became curious. Everyone also calmed down and listened attentively. Darren talked freely. Golden Lion now clearly does not want to go to war with our navy on a large scale, so he uses this method to make a stop infiltrating his pirate group. This means that he is plotting something he thinks is more important. Or, things. Then the problem is back to square one. Darren pointed to the huge simulation sand table on the table. What are the reasons for the places he attacked? Here, he looked at Kong Gang with a hint of meaning, and said with a smile. Perhaps Marshal Kong can answer this question for me. As soon as this was said, the faces of Zhongguo, Garp and Crane's staff officer changed slightly. Kong Gang narrowed his eyes and looked at Darren. After a long silence, he slowly said. For some things, it is not good for you to know too much. He swept his eyes from Darren, Sakaski, Borsellino and Kuzan's faces one by one, and suddenly sighed. But with your qualifications and talents, you will get involved in these secrets sooner or later. Kong Gang took a deep breath, and his old eyes were filled with unprecedented solemnity. Golden Lion is looking for historical texts buried all over the world. To be more precise, he is looking for clues about the 3 ancient weapons recorded in the historical texts. It is true. Darren's heart trembled. In fact, when he found the pattern of the Golden Lion's attack target, he vaguely realized that the Golden Lion was looking for the historical text. Ancient weapons. Sakaski frowned and said. Does this kind of illusory thing really exist? Gong Gukong nodded and said carefully. Yes, ancient weapons do exist. From ancient times there are 3 ancient weapons with the title of God that have existed since the ancient times and can destroy the world. They are Pluto, the god of the sea, Poseidon, and Uranus. It is rumored that the 3 ancient weapons all have the terrifying power to destroy the world. Among them, Pluto, the god of the sea, is a huge battleship. It is said that one shot can destroy an island. Chapter 86 Who is the unlucky guy? Speaking of this, Kong Gang paused deliberately with a solemn face, as if waiting for some reaction. However, the rest of the people just looked at him quietly, as if waiting for him to continue. Kong Gang. Well, I almost forgot that these brats are extraordinary monsters. If it were the group of naval generals just now, they would probably be shocked or gasping now. I should have known not to drive them out so early. Kong Gang couldn't help muttering in his heart. However, the secret of the ancient weapon is of great importance, and it is indeed not suitable for ordinary naval generals to know too much. I didn't expect that the legendary ancient weapon actually exists. From this point of view, the goal of the Golden Lion is very likely to be this. Sakaski said in a deep voice. Kuzan scratched his head and said. But this ancient weapon sounds like this, right? One strike can destroy an island. Can't Darren's Yama do it? Darren shook his head and said. It's different. With Yama's ability, even if the maximum power is increased by 100 times, it can only destroy a small or medium-sized island at most, and after one attack, it takes a long time to use it again. But ancient weapons, I always feel that their power is far greater than Yama. The ability of the Sea King, White Star, in the original plot emerged in his mind. If the ability to summon and control thousands of meters-long super-large Sea Kings to fight for it in a large area is controllable, let alone destroying an island, it may even be possible to change the terrain of a sea area. If the power of Sea King Poseidon is so powerful, Pluto will naturally not be much inferior. One shot destroys an island. Maybe just a random shot. Steel Bone Sora nodded and said carefully. In short, although the three ancient weapons have disappeared for a long time, and it is very likely that they have been buried in the long river of history, there is still a probability that they exist in the world. Once the Golden Lion controls this power to destroy the world, no one in this sea will be able to stop his ambition. When everyone heard this, a terrifying picture emerged in their minds. A huge warship named after Pluto was floated in the sky by Golden Lion using the power of the Devil Fruit, and appeared silently above the Navy headquarters at a very long distance, and then… one shot. Kuzan couldn't help but shudder. Sakazuki's expression became more gloomy. Cold sweat broke out on Sengoku's back. We must not let Golden Lion get any clues about ancient weapons. Such a thought surged into everyone's mind. With that guy's crazy behavior, who knows what he will do? So Darren, what do you think? Zhongguo was a little nervous at this time, and couldn't help looking at Darren expectantly. If the Golden Lion got the ancient weapon, he didn't know what would happen to the natural kids like Sakazuki after such a shot, but he, a fantasy beast that couldn't fly, would definitely be blown to pieces. Darren thought about it and took out a cigar. Kuzan next to him immediately handed over a lighter with a smile. After lighting the cigar and taking a deep puff, Darren pondered and said, although the Golden Lion's method of finding clues to ancient weapons is crude, it is undoubtedly effective. Although it takes a lot of time, he will find relevant clues sooner or later. And the most important point is that we can't stop him at all. We can only watch all this happen. Everyone nodded in agreement, and their hearts gradually sank. The truth is cruel. This is also the reason why the Golden Lion made threats recklessly. Even with the strength of the Navy, facing the tyrannical ability of the Golden Lion, it is helpless. But this does not mean that we can't do anything. Darren's style suddenly changed, and a light ignited in everyone's hearts. Do you have any method? Zhongguo asked eagerly. Although I don't know how effective it is, I do have such an interesting idea. Darren's mouth curled up a malicious smile. Seeing this smile, Zhongguo's mouth twitched, and there was always a bad premonition. Darren smiled and said, we can just tell him where the ancient weapons are. The conference room suddenly became quiet. Warring States. Crane Staff Officer. Garp. Gang Gukong. They stared at Darren with their eyes wide open, looking at him in bewilderment. We don't even know where the ancient weapons are. How can we tell him? And even if we know the clues to the ancient weapons, we can't tell Golden Lion. Warring States quickly reacted, swallowed his saliva, and said in a hoarse voice. You mean, tell him a false clue. Then we ambush him at the destination. As soon as these words came out, everyone's eyes lit up. No, false clues can't fool Golden Lion, who is so insidious and cunning. Darren smiled and shook his head, spitting out a dragon-like smoke from his mouth. Besides, if the ambush was useful to Golden Lion, our Navy would have arrested him long ago, and he wouldn't be so sad here. Zhongguo was silent after hearing this. Indeed, it is difficult to deceive the bastard Golden Lion with the truth and clues. Even if he was lucky enough to deceive, he would not be easily fooled by the ambush circle set up by the Navy in advance. Golden Lion's observation hockey is not a decoration. What do you mean? Steel Bone Kong frowned. Darren smiled and said, we can release a message through the underground world. The content of the message is very simple. It's nothing more than a big pirate who got clues about ancient weapons. In this way, there is no need for our Navy to take action. Golden Lion will naturally go to trouble that unlucky guy. After the voice fell, Zhongguo stood up suddenly, his eyes bursting with amazing light. Good. He couldn't help but growl. The others were also gradually figuring out Darren's conspiracy. If the news was that the clue was in a certain location, Golden Lion would be very likely to be on guard. When he actually went to the specific destination to investigate and found that the information was false, he would naturally attack other islands and towns again and continue to look for clues to ancient weapons. This couldn't stop Golden Lion at all. But if the news was released that the clue to the ancient weapon was in the hands of a big pirate, it would be different. Golden Lion would start a protracted battle with that person, and might even be able to take advantage of such an opportunity to weaken the power of the pirates in the New World. But Darren, how can you guarantee that Golden Lion will fight the target in the false news instead of clarifying it directly? At this time, Chief of Staff Crane directly pointed out Darren's biggest loophole. Everyone was stunned and began to ponder. Yes, what if the Golden Lion came to the door, and the pirate confronted the Golden Lion, and then quickly clarified the truth? Wouldn't their efforts be in vain? Darren said lightly. So the targets we choose cannot be Kaido and Big Mom, two guys who have a good relationship with the Golden Lion. Hearing this, Sengoku opened his eyes wide. Could it be? At this time, Borsellino smiled and said. So, who is the unlucky guy this time? Darren glanced at him and smiled. Gall D. Roger. Everyone was stunned. Darren's words were like a thunder, exploding in the depths of their minds. Gall D. Roger. This is indeed the best choice. As we all know, Roger and Golden Lion are old enemies, and they had a grudge during the Battle of God Valley. And the most important point is that with Roger's peculiar personality, once Golden Lion comes to the door, he will never explain or clarify. Once the two meet and confront, there is no other possibility except conflict and war. Garp was the first to react, and he hugged Darren's neck excitedly, laughing. Ha 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 ha. Darren boy, I admire you more and more. Zhongguo glanced at Darren in doubt. This kid is too insidious. He just said that Golden Lion is insidious, but now it seems that he is the one with the worst heart. Facing the different expressions of the crowd, Darren just smiled. He knew that this plan would definitely succeed. Because what he released was not fake news at all. Roger does have some clues about ancient weapons. And under such a deployment, Golden Lion and Roger will definitely have a shocking war. As for the specific location, Darren narrowed his eyes and swept across the huge simulation sand table, and quickly locked a certain location. The specific name was marked on that location. At Wall C. Merry Christmas. Chapter 87 How to Practice the Indestructible Diamond. So, a secret plan launched by the Navy against the Golden Lion was determined at the end of the meeting. An hour later, in an intelligence sales base in an underground black market in the New World, a piece of secret information with a very high price was bought by a pirate in the New World. The gears of fate began to turn. Marshall's mansion. In the meeting room, Sakazuki and others had already left the office and were vigorously preparing for the secret mobilization in preparation before the war. Especially Garp, after knowing that Darren's target was Roger, he changed his lazy habits and went to help excitedly, not even taking time to finish the senbei stolen from Sengoku. Then if there is nothing else, the subordinate will leave first. Darren finished smoking the cigar in his hand and nodded slightly to Steel Bone Sora and Sengoku. Wait, Darren. Sengoku suddenly called him. What's wrong, General Sengoku? Darren looked at Zhongguo in confusion. Zhongguo and Gangji Yukong looked at each other, and then asked in a deep voice. Darren, if Roger and Golden Lion explode war, in your opinion, how likely is it that Kaido will join the war? He paused and added. The Golden Lion flying pirates' arms channels all come from Kaido, and there may be a possibility that these two guys will form an alliance. After hearing what Sengoku said, Darren pondered for a few seconds, then grinned. Don't worry, General Sengoku. I will make sure Kaido doesn't have time to join the war. When Kong Gang and Zhongguo heard this, they looked at each other with doubts on their faces. But they reacted quickly, their faces changed slightly, and they stared at the Vice Admiral in front of them with wide eyes. You little brat, you can't be. As if to confirm something, Kong Gang's figure suddenly jumped up from his seat, with a powerful and domineering momentum, and appeared in front of Darren in the blink of an eye. The muscles on his muscular arms pounded, and he punched with unstoppable momentum. The speed of this punch was not fast, and even with Darren's eyesight, he could clearly see the rough calluses on Kong Gang's fist. Darren smiled and punched as well. Neither of them used the armed color domineering. This was a pure battle of arm strength and physique. Bang! The two fists collided dully in midair, bursting out a circle of sharp air waves, blowing the wide cloaks behind the two men wildly. The whole marshal's mansion seemed to shake. The two men did not move at all. Crackling. The ground and the wall cracked with more than a dozen long cracks. The crystal chandelier above the head creaked and shook, and the jumping light made the angular face of the vice admiral look deep and mysterious. Steel Bone Kong looked at Darren solemnly. The latter smiled brightly in return. Zhang was dumbfounded and could not believe his eyes. Gold, King Kong. He stammered, looking like he had seen a ghost. The indestructible body of King Kong. I didn't expect that you, a kid, actually cultivated it. Gang Gukong then continued Zhang Guo's words, slowly retracted his fist, and looked at Darren with indescribable emotion in his eyes. He looked at the cold and hard light lingering on Darren's fist bone, shook his head with emotion, and sighed. The young are really formidable. With their vision, they recognized him almost at the first sight. Darren, this brat, has actually cultivated his physique to the realm of Vajra indestructible. Before this, only Kaido could do this on the sea today. And it is precisely with his Vajra indestructible body that Kaido has earned the title of Immortal Monster. Even if he was arrested by the Navy and tortured by various means and cruel methods, his physical defense could not be broken. And now, Darren has actually done this. The most exaggerated point is that from the brief test just now, Gang Ji Yukong clearly felt that Darren's physical strength was not inferior to his own. Even in the normal state without charging and passive parrying, he can burst out the exaggerated strength of a giant warrior. You know, Gang Ji Yukong relied on his inhuman arm strength to roam the sea and rarely had an opponent. How did you cultivate this kid? Obviously, during the Battle of Marineford, your physique was far from being so strong. Zhang Guo came over with a face full of curiosity, looking at Darren as if he was looking at a rare treasure. His eyes were shining, and he kept reaching out to touch and pinch Darren's body. The muscles and skin are full of elasticity, and they look and feel just like ordinary people. Only when you really apply force to touch, you can detect the terrifying toughness and hardness hidden in the skin and flesh, as well as the strong and exaggerated explosive power of the muscles. Darren took a step back calmly, avoiding the restless hand of Zhang Guo, the old Biden, and smiled. I went to Wano country and the fight with Kaido gave me a lot of inspiration. What inspiration? Zhang Guo's eyes lit up. There is such a good thing in fighting Kaido. How come I don't know? If Darren's practice method can be copied, can they promote it in the Navy? As a Navy admiral and future Navy marshal, Zhang Guo realized the huge role of this almost instantly. He himself was not very envious. Although the Vajra indestructible body is indeed very strong, and after successful practice, it means that on a large-scale chaotic battlefield, there is no need to worry about cold arrows and sneak attacks. Even in the face of bombardment and bullets, you can charge recklessly. But for the top fighters, the Vajra indestructible body can't really determine the outcome of the battle. The strength of domineering, physique, strength, development and application of devil fruits, environment, weather, sufficient physical strength, physical condition. There are too many factors that affect it. Steel Bone Kong also became curious. Vajra indestructible body is almost a legend. They have tried to conduct special training in this area before, but all failed. Since then, they have reached such a consensus. This is a natural talent, not something that can be achieved through training. But now, Darren's existence has overturned their concept. It's actually very simple. Speaking of this, Darren couldn't help but feel a little proud. He straightened his chest and said as a matter of course, try not to use hockey, and take dozens of Kaido sticks head-on. Warring States. Gangu Kong. Take dozens of Kaido sticks head-on. Even they can't do this. People are dead, why practice Vajra indestructibility? Chapter 88 Don't Tell Zephyr. Okay. Gangu Kong and Warring States were immediately deflated, looking at the freak in front of them with resentment. Only this madman can think of such a method. The underlying logic of this training method is fine. Through high-intensity, strike, training, the body's ability to resist blows is improved. There is nothing wrong with this. It's just a bit life-consuming. However, the two of them reacted quickly and couldn't help but smile. Darren has cultivated the Vajra indestructible body, and his strength and breath have been significantly improved. What does this mean? There is another Admiral-level combat force in their Navy camp. This is undoubtedly excellent news for the Navy that is about to usher in a war. In that case, Kaido's side is up to you, Darren, you take on more responsibilities. Wen Guo patted Darren's shoulder enthusiastically and smiled with satisfaction. There was no one available before, but it's different now. In the Battle of Marineford, Sakazuki and Borsellino successfully entered the Admiral-level combat power, and with the rise of the Golden Age, the Navy can be said to be full of talents. Although the military support from various countries is limited in number, it can be regarded as a temporary solution to the Navy's short-term military expenditure shortage. Talents, troops, funds, equipment. Now everything is ready, and Warring States is ready to roll up his sleeves and fight a big battle. As for Kaido in Wano country, it may be extremely difficult for others, but for Darren, a monster, it should not be a big problem to create some trouble for Kaido and make him have no time to participate in the next war. Darren smiled and said, "No problem, General Sengoku. It just so happens that I want to visit Kaido again soon." Hearing the strange tone in the word, visit, Sengoku and Steel Bone Kong couldn't help but twitch their mouths, and their heads were full of black lines. At this time, they had to be thankful that Darren was a Navy, not a pirate. Otherwise, with his insidious cunning and difficult ability, they, the Navy, would have to suffer a lot. After a brief moment of silence for Kaido, the great injustice, Sengoku suddenly seemed to remember something and added, "By the way, it's better not to let Zephyr, the bastard, know about your breakthrough. I'm afraid he will directly doubt his life." New World, Wano Country. Kai. Kaido, who was directing the reconstruction of the military factory in the Kuri area, suddenly sneezed, and a faint chill inexplicably rushed out from behind. "Did you catch a cold?" Kaido took a sip of hot wine and shook his head again. What a joke. With his indestructible physique, let alone a cold, even the virus developed by that bastard Quinn would not have any effect on his physique. Speaking of that bastard Quinn, Kaido suddenly became angry and turned to Jin, who was busy beside him, and said, "Abel, where is Quinn? We are busy with reconstruction here, why is that guy nowhere to be seen all day long?" Looking at the countless members of the 100 Beasts pirates busy in front of him, Kaido became more and more angry. That damn Navy kid Darren actually invaded Wano country and destroyed nearly 1/3 of the military factory production lines of their 100 Beasts pirates. The most hateful thing is that he actually said he would visit me next time. What does he think this is? Is it Fun Street? This is Wano country. Kaido's territory is not an amusement park where you can go whenever you want. Damn it. Kaido couldn't help but clench his fists, his eyes gradually filled with ferocious bloodshot, and his fists clenched. The root of all this is because of that bastard Quinn. If he hadn't been idle and injected so many strange viruses into that Navy kid, how could the Navy kid's strength improve so quickly? I can kill him instantly with one stick. Jin was keenly aware of the murderous aura and anger released by Kaido, pursed his lips, and replied in a low voice. "Mr. Kaido, Quinn has locked himself in his laboratory these days, saying that he wants to conduct some experiments." Damn it. What does he want to do again? Kaido picked up the huge black mace, turned his head and strode towards the direction of the laboratory. Jin's eyelids twitched wildly, but he didn't dare to stop him at all, and quickly followed him. Along the way, the members of the Beast's pirates who passed by were so frightened by the aggressive Kaido that they trembled all over and subconsciously hid far away. Soon the two of them arrived outside Quinn's huge laboratory. Before they got close, Kaido and Jin heard a series of miserable screams coming from the laboratory. Boss Quinn, don't come over here. Don't move. As long as you inject my virus, you will become stronger. How is this possible? This can kill people. Boss Quinn, I was wrong, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have stolen your red bean soup. What? You kid actually dared to steal my red bean soup. Damn it. Red bean soup is my favorite thing. Increase the injection volume by 20%. The miserable howling sound, like the devil's scream, continued to be heard. From this shrill sound alone, you can tell that the unfortunate guy is suffering unimaginable pain. However, the scream only lasted for 3 seconds and stopped abruptly. The next moment, with a bang, the door of the laboratory was kicked open heavily. 2 fully armed staff members wearing protective clothing walked out quickly with a stretcher, and their faces turned pale because of panic. On the stretcher, a small minion of the beast's pirates was covered in blood and flesh, with a strange blue color on his body, and he was already dead. Damn it. Failed again. This is impossible. The fat man in overalls came out in a rage, his fat body bulged his white coat, and his face was crazy. It's obvious that Darren succeeded. Why can't others? He roared. Next. But as soon as he said that, he felt something and turned around with a tremor. Kaido boss. In his pupils, a huge mace was rapidly enlarging. Boom. The fat man in overalls flew backwards dozens of meters like a cannonball, and smashed deeply into a hill in the distance, causing the mountain to collapse. You bastard. We don't have enough manpower, what are you doing here? Kaido said breathlessly, holding a mace. He looked at the pile of corpses behind the laboratory and was furious. Chapter 89. Sorry to disappoint you, Barrett. Quinn, this bastard, actually used so many people for experiments. Kaido glared and panted. It hurts. In the collapsed hill, Quinn climbed out with a bruised face and grimaced in pain. Looking at Kaido who was walking towards him angrily with a mace, he was so scared that his fat trembled and said tremblingly. Kaido boss, I just want to help them strengthen their strength. Since Darren and Barrett can become stronger by injecting the virus, I think others should be able to do it too, right? If the experiment is really successful, we can mass-produce powerful warriors. Shut up. Kaido raised his mace angrily and roared. In Quinn's horrified eyes, dense purple electric light began to emerge from the mace in Kaido's hand. No, Boss Kaido. Do you think everyone is that little navy kid? Kaido rushed out with gritted teeth. Thunder Bagua. Boom. A column of dust hundreds of meters high rose into the sky. Accompanied by the sound of thunder, Quinn's shrill wails like a pig being slaughtered rang out in the valley one after another, echoing for a long time. Jin turned around helplessly, looked at the sunset in the distance, and sighed deeply. After 10 minutes, the wails slowly disappeared. The terrain of the entire vast valley has changed drastically. The undulating hills have become shocking giant pits, densely spread across the land, and from a distance it looks like the surface of the moon. The smoke and dust are everywhere, and the wind is blowing. Kaido walked out of the smoke slowly, holding the mace Hachisai in one hand and the fat man in overalls by his feet in the other, dragging him back like a dead pig. The latter had completely fainted, his face was swollen like a pig's head, his head was full of lumps, and his eyeballs kept spinning. After a round of venting, Kaido's anger was mostly gone. He snorted and sat on the ground, picked up the wine pot on his waist and drank it. Seeing that he seemed to be in a much better mood, Jin found an opportunity and said in a deep voice. Mr. Kaido, the last batch of arms ordered by Golden Lion this time has just been sent out. Kaido wiped the wine from the corner of his mouth, hummed and said. I don't know what the bastard Shiki has been doing recently. He has been attacking some towns and ports crazily. He is not afraid of the navy and the government getting anxious. Speaking of this, Kaido could not help but frown. Logically speaking, Shiki is not an impulsive and reckless person. He must be plotting something by doing this. Jin also fell into deep thought and wondered. He purchased such a large amount of arms from us. I always feel that he wants to plan a huge war. But Mr. Kaido, why don't you tell him about that navy? Kaido snorted coldly. What's there to say about this? When Shiki, that bastard, invaded Marineford, he dragged me into the water. After the war, he hid and got rid of everything. Instead, I was targeted by that damn Navy kid. He gritted his teeth. When I was in the Rocks Pirates, Ling Ling told me that in addition to our captain, Shiki should never be trusted. To hope he will suffer a little at the hands of Darren the Kid. The so-called alliance and cooperation between pirates are only for the sake of interests. On this sea, Kaido doesn't trust anyone except Ling Ling. Hearing this, Jin fell silent. Although what Kaido said made sense, he didn't know why, but he always felt that things would develop in an unpredictable direction. At the same time, a certain sea area in the Grand Channel. On a deserted island. By the coast, a bonfire was rising. Members of Roger's pirate group sat around the bonfire, happily eating barbecue, singing songs, and laughing happily from time to time. Behind a huge reef more than 10 meters away from the bonfire, Roger sat in the shadow under the reef, staring straight at the ground in front of him. Cough cough cough. His face was listless, his hair was messy, and he coughed hoarsely from time to time, like a person with a hangover. Rayleigh and Jabba folded their arms across their chests, looked at him with a sad face, and said nothing. Hey, don't look at me like that, I'm not going to die soon. Roger glanced at them and laughed carelessly. He bent his arms and posed a posture to show off his muscles, and a bright smile appeared at the corners of his slightly pale mouth. At least I won't die before completing our journey. Rayleigh pursed his lips and said unhappily. Just say less. Jabba also shook his head helplessly. However, infected by Roger's optimistic character, the clouds between their brows also dissipated a little. Roger, your life is about to come to an end. We will accompany you through this wonderful life. The two of them secretly clenched their fists, their eyes firm. Captain, it's time to take medicine. At this time, a voice came from the side. The man had a very unique hairstyle, like a blooming saffron, wearing a pair of frameless glasses, a floral shirt and beach shorts, and was holding a bowl of black medicine in his hand. This was the latest ship doctor of Roger's Pirates. Before joining Roger's Pirates, he was the lighthouse keeper of the Twin Cape at the entrance of the Grand Line. Not long ago, when Roger's Pirates decided to sail around the sea again and pass through the Twin Towers, he decided to accept Roger's invitation to board the ship. Dr. Crocus, your medicine is too bitter, why don't I not drink it? Anyway, I won't die from this disease for a while, right? When Roger saw the medicine in Crocus's hand, his face immediately wrinkled into a bitter gourd, waving his hand and shaking his head. You have to drink it, otherwise you can't fulfill your dream of traveling around the world. Crocus was helpless. Before joining Roger's pirate group, he never thought that the legendary pirate Gul D. Roger, who was famous in the sea, had a personality like a child. I have added sugar in it this time, it should not be so bitter. He handed the bowl over like coaxing a child. Really? Roger looked at him doubtfully. Crocus nodded solemnly. You didn't lie to me, did you? Roger looked at Rayleigh and Jabba again. Rayleigh and Jabba were stunned at the same time, but they saw from the corner of their eyes that Crocus was winking at them, so they nodded and promised. Definitely not bitter. Okay then. Roger muttered, took the medicine bowl, looked up with a bitter face, and poured all the medicine into his mouth. Then, poof! The black medicine spurted out of Roger's mouth like a fountain. Crocus. Rayleigh. Jabba. It's so bitter. Roger's face twisted, and he didn't drink a single sip of the medicine. I'll make another bowl. Crocus turned around dimly. Thank you, Dr. Crocus. Rayleigh and Jabba bowed deeply. However, just as Crocus walked away, a steady and powerful footsteps suddenly came. Rayleigh and Jabba were both startled and their faces changed slightly. They turned their heads and saw a tall and burly blonde figure standing not far away, looking at Roger who was rolling on the ground with gloomy eyes. Sure enough, you won't live much longer, right? Barrett's eyes flickered with unspeakable meaning. There was regret, sadness, unwillingness. But more of it was unbelievable. Captain Roger. Roger stopped rolling, stood up from the ground, and patted the mud on his butt. He smiled disapprovingly. I've been discovered. After getting the confirmation, Barrett stood there in a daze as if struck by lightning. He stared at Roger blankly, and it took him a while to come back to his senses and turn around. Since you are not the strongest, there is no need for me to stay in the pirate group. He said this with his back to Roger in a cold tone. Rayleigh and Jabba were shocked. What are you talking about? We are about to complete the great voyage. Barrett, how can you leave at this time? They stared at Barrett's broad, tall, but resolute and cold back, and asked angrily. Barrett took a step, the sarcastic voice echoed in the air. A dying man is not qualified to be the captain of Douglas Barrett. You. Rayleigh and Jabba were furious. It's okay. Roger waved his hand to interrupt the two and smiled. Let him go. He looked at Barrett's back as he walked away, and suddenly shouted with a smile. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Barrett. Barrett paused. He lowered his head, gritted his teeth, and his eyes were red under his golden hair. He clenched his fists and grinned wantonly. What bullshit are you talking about, Roger? I never expected anything from you. After that, he quickened his pace and ran towards the small submarine on the coast as if he was running away. Barrett, go. I believe you will become the strongest in the world. Roger's hearty and heroic laughter came from behind. Barrett staggered, clenched his fists, and dived into his submarine. After he hid in the submarine and was far away from the island, Barrett stopped the engine and looked at the empty cabin in front of him with a dull expression. Bang! He pounded on the control lever with both fists and roared angrily. Damn it! Damn it! Under the messy blonde hair, he had already burst into tears. Chapter 90. You listened to my quibbling. The setting sun was like blood, rippling on the sea in the distance. Roger pinched his nose and finally drank the newly brewed medicine. He sat bored under the reef, wiping the shiny silver long knife with an oilcloth. Just let him go, Roger. I know you admire Barrett. Rayleigh stood beside him with his arms folded, his back against the reef, looking at the endless sea in the distance with a melancholy look. Roger paused while wiping his long knife, his eyes drooping. That kid has his own way to go. He suddenly laughed. Rayleigh, everyone has their own order of appearance. For me, the most perfect ending of my life is the end of this journey. But Barrett's life is still very long. The climax of his journey should not be now. Rayleigh stared at Roger's smiling face, and after a moment of silence, he also laughed slowly. You guys always see things so clearly. There was emotion in his smile. Roger laughed so hard that the two tufts of black beard that seemed to grow out of his nostrils trembled. He was very proud, as if it was a great thing to be recognized and praised by Rayleigh. It's great to be young. He raised his hands high and stretched his waist, with a smile full of satisfaction on his face. Oh no, Captain Roger. At this moment, the other crew members of Roger's pirate group ran over with panic on their faces. Buggy, with a red nose, was so anxious that his face turned red. He held up a piece of information in his hand and said with trembling teeth. I don't know when a message came out in the New World, saying that our Roger pirates have the clues to the ancient weapon that can destroy the world. It seems that many pirate groups and major forces are eyeing us now. Shanks, wearing a straw hat, gritted his teeth and said. This is a false accusation. This is a frame-up. This is fake news. Fake news. The faces of others also showed tension. How do they know the clues of ancient weapons? All they do every day is drink, eat meat and have parties. They don't even do much of the pirates' work of looting. What? Roger was shocked. How do they know that I have the clues of ancient weapons? Time stopped for a moment. Then, the members of Roger's pirate group stared at their captain in astonishment, their faces dull. This is not fake news. This is true. New World. A certain underground trading port. Boom. A huge explosion rose to the sky in the exchange, and the gushing flames instantly engulfed the huge exchange. The majestic air waves shattered all the glass of buildings within a radius of several kilometers. Pirates, civilians, merchants, nobles, everyone looked at the figure slowly floating up in the sea of fire and ruins in horror. The unruly flying golden hair was like the mane of a lion, the eyes were filled with cruel grins, and the aura emanating from the body was as terrifying as that of a god or demon, making people terrified and desperate. Golden lion. Golden lion Shaki. Why is he here? The crowd retreated with pale faces, and even trampled on each other, desperately running away. Ha 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 ha. So, tell me. Golden Lion hooked his finger, and the burning ruins slowly gathered into a towering black rock wall. In the middle of the rock wall heart, imprisoning a middle-aged man who looked like a businessman. His whole body was completely swallowed by the floating and compressed mud, leaving only a head exposed, and he was looking at the big pirate in front of him in horror. The figure of the golden lion floated up and moved in front of the man. His violent pupils squeezed out different sizes and said jokingly, "Who holds the secret of that piece of information, the clue of the ancient weapon?" While speaking, his clenched fist slowly tightened. The huge wall structure seemed to be controlled by some force and kept compressing. The man's body burst into crackling sounds of broken bones, and blood could not stop oozing from his mouth and nose. The unprecedented pain made him scream miserably. "It's Roger. Gall D. Roger. That's what the intelligence said. Roger has the clues to the ancient weapons. Ah, please let me go. Roger." The golden lion's pupils shrank slightly, and then he burst into a hoarse and rampant laugh. "Ha ha ha ha. It's you, Roger. This is really unexpected." He licked his cracked lips. "In that case, let's settle our past accounts once and for all." The golden lion laughed loudly, and his figure soared into the sky. "Let me go. I've given you the information." The man shouted in fear as he watched the golden lion's receding back. But the next second, a huge shadow quickly rose in front of his eyes. The earth is rumbling, roaring, and rising. A rock lion that covers the sky and the sun opens its bloody mouth, like a raging tsunami, swallowing up the entire town. In the town that keeps falling, the golden lion's unruly laughter resounds through the sky. "Ha ha ha, Darren kid, just wait for me. When I get the ancient weapon, I will sink Marineford into the sea and let you see the horror of real pirates." Marine Headquarters, Marineford. Ah. Walking home, Darren suddenly felt a chill and couldn't help sneezing. "Are you catching a cold?" He wiped his nose, a little confused. But he quickly shook his head again, muttering with a dumb laugh. "How is this possible? Even an indestructible body can catch a cold. It's probably someone who is thinking about me." Darren laughed at himself. There were too many enemies, he couldn't even count them all. At this time, dusk was coming to an end, and the night sky gradually emerged. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse, and the night wind was cold. Darren tightened his military uniform, turned a corner of the street, and then stood there in a daze. Looking at the tall figure standing at the end of the street, his eyes twitched. Darren finally understood where the chill came from. So, Fun Street is fun. Guillaume stood in the moonlight, his cold eyes looked at Darren quietly, and his slender white hands had already pressed the hilt of the knife at his waist. "That Guillaume, listen to my quibbling." Chapter 91 Familiar Lines. Navy Headquarters, Marineford. Guillaume's mansion. "So, Happy Street is fun." Guillaume crossed his arms and looked at the vice admiral in front of him with a half-smile, his eyes seemed to exude some amazing murderous intent. "Well, it's actually quite fun. It's mainly about the casinos, arenas and so on, which have absolutely nothing to do with the Queen of Happy Street." Darren muttered in his heart. But when he saw Guillaume slowly holding the handle of the famous sword, he immediately shuddered and smiled. "Guillaume, listen to my quibbling. No, listen to my explanation." Guillaume's beautiful eyes narrowed dangerously, examining the vice admiral in front of him, and said coldly, "I'm listening." "Huh, it seems there is still a chance." Darren's eyes lit up slightly. Looking at Guillaume's reaction, it seems that she still doesn't know what she did in Happy Street, oh no, who she is. After a second of thinking, a trace of sadness suddenly appeared in Darren's eyes. He couldn't help but sighed and said helplessly, In fact, I appeared in Happy Street to recuperate. It was not something I could control. It was all an accident. While speaking, he slowly unbuttoned his military uniform, revealing a body with great visual impact. Cross-cut scars were lying in it, and some new scars could be identified, still showing pink color. Especially the horrible wound that penetrated the chest cavity after the rib fracture was still very clear and looked very scary. Guillaume's eyes shrank, and he couldn't help but exclaim, "Your injury." Darren smiled bitterly and nodded. After the successful raid on Wangguo, I received a secret order from General Sengoku. He said that he had found the traces of the beast pirates and asked me to investigate the situation. Darren pushed Sengoku out to take the blame without hesitation. General Sengoku is indeed the wisest general in our navy. The result turned out to be just as he expected. I found traces of the beast pirates in Wano country. Kaido has already entered Wano country and secretly controlled the closed country, making it his territory. Kaido has built a large number of military factories there. I firmly believe in my duty, decided to take the risk and try to destroy the production line of its military factory. Then you fought Kaido. Guillaume's eyes could not hide the shock. Darren nodded with difficulty and said, "Kaido is too strong. I finally escaped from the siege of him and other members of the beast pirates. The injuries on my body were too severe, and I was exhausted. I lost consciousness directly during the flight. When I woke up, I was already in Fun Street." At this point, Darren sighed deeply, raised his head, and looked at Guillaume affectionately. "You said that I was injured so fatally, how could I do anything in Fun Street?" Guillaume pursed his lips and fell silent. "So, did I misunderstand and blame you?" After a while, she suddenly whispered. Darren observed her expression change, and a hint of arc appeared at the corner of his mouth. "This girl is still too young. Actually, you are not wrong. The fault is all mine. I shouldn't have made you worry." Darren's tone was filled with guilt. While speaking, a coin appeared in his hand like magic. The coin was in the shape of a copper coin and looked ancient. "This is the currency of Wano country, the spoils of my action this time. I said before that every time I go to a place, I will bring you a local currency." Darren smiled, as a faint arc of electricity flickered between his fingers. The copper coin in his hand suddenly melted, stretched, and twisted like a living thing, as if it was made by a top craftsman, rippling out ripples, and finally outlining an exquisite and beautiful thorny rose, blooming gorgeously in his hand. "A gift for you, Guillaume. Thanks to the increasingly profound control of the devil fruit ability during this period, and the delicate control brought by the observation hockey, the gold foil rose made by Darren is obviously more exquisite and realistic than the last time." Guillaume stared at the rose in Darren's hand, and was speechless for a while. He really remembers. Guillaume reached out, took the rose, and carefully inserted it in the vase, which contrasted with the last one. Against the night, it flickered with a faint light. "Do you like it?" Darren smiled. "Yeah." Guillaume nodded gently. "Good. Successfully got away with it." Seeing Guillaume's docile look, Darren raised a smile. "As long as you like it, I will try my best to do it. But how do you explain the matter of the Queen of Fun Street?" "Huh?" Darren was struck by lightning. He looked up with a confused look on his face, and the smile on his face suddenly froze. Guillaume said with a half-smile. "How is she?" "What?" Darren sensed the danger and stepped back subconsciously. "She actually knew. Damn it. This woman's acting skills even fooled me." Guillaume's face gradually showed anger, and she sneered. "I heard that Stussy, the Queen of Happy Street, is the most romantic woman in this sea. She should serve you very well, right?" "That." Darren laughed awkwardly. But before he could react, Guillaume had already pounced on him swiftly. She pressed Darren under her with a fierce expression. She glared at Darren fiercely, with a strong desire to win in her eyes. "So, how many times did you have sex?" Darren was stunned for a moment, and then he had a bad feeling in his heart. This line. And this plot. Why is it so familiar? Could it be? 3 hours later. Darren held his lower back, one hand on the wall, and limped out of the Guillaume mansion. 2 dark circles appeared in his eye sockets. As expected, women are so competitive. It's really scary. Darren shuddered all over, and subconsciously she looked back at the small house in the mansion. The small house, which was emitting warm lights, seemed like a deep and endless beast, which made Darren feel numb. The facts proved that even the indestructible body of Diamond was not completely invincible. Thinking that Tianyushi was probably still waiting for him at home, Darren couldn't help but show a smile that was uglier than crying. Darren sighed and walked towards home with his head shaking. It's really suffering. Chapter 92 Battle of Etwall. The night was getting darker. Walking on the streets of the Navy headquarters, Darren smoked several cigarettes before he could barely recover. Along the way, the patrolling Navy team stopped from time to time and saluted Darren with admiration. Darren just waved at them weakly. But then again, how did Guillaume know about Stussy? While smoking, Darren began to think. Logically speaking, the things about Happy Street there shouldn't be many people. Could it be that Kaji betrayed me? But this is unlikely. I bribed him with my VIP card. Darren shook his head and decided not to think about it because he couldn't think of too many clues. Guillaume's identity is here, maybe there is some special intelligence channel in the Navy. Soon, Darren returned to the gate of his mansion. Since the Golden Lion invaded Marineford, his original family compound has been destroyed in the war. Thanks to the promotion of Vice Admiral and his outstanding achievements in the war, the headquarters specially approved a mansion of the highest standards for Darren. Compared to the original small courtyard, the quaint Japanese mansion in front of him is at least 5 times larger than the original one, and is equipped with an independent private hot spring and viewing courtyard, which looks more magnificent and elegant as a whole. After a simple check of his appearance, Darren tiptoed to open the door of the mansion, kept his voice as low as possible, walked through the courtyard full of cherry blossoms, and walked into the house. The room was very quiet, with only an oil lamp lit, which made it warm and peaceful. Darren turned on the light carefully. "My husband, are you back?" A gentle voice came from behind, making Darren's action of turning on the light stiff. It's so late, I thought you were asleep." Darren's eyelids twitched, and a nonchalant smile appeared on his face, and he turned around. Tien Yushi, wearing a loose pink kimono, stood there, smiling peacefully at him. Meeting Tien Yushi's quiet and calm eyes, Darren somehow panicked, coughed twice and explained. "The military meeting was a little late, I'm sorry." Tien Yushi smiled and shook her head. "It's okay, my husband has worked hard." She walked forward slowly like a virtuous wife, helped Darren take off the navy cloak behind him, and turned around to hang it on the clothes rack. Seeing that Ashi seemed to have noticed nothing, Darren secretly breathed a sigh of relief and laughed easily. "There is no way, General Zongguo has been dragging me to discuss military affairs, which delayed my return home." Tien Yushi smiled sweetly. "I understand." She looked at Darren and her head suddenly tilted. "So did my husband Koak's sister Guillaume." Darren's smile froze on the spot. "No, why are all my women so good at lying?" Seeing Darren's embarrassed look, Tien Yushi couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckled, teasing cunningly. "What happened between my husband and the Queen of Happy Street? I think Sister Guillaume will definitely be very angry." Darren. "Damn it. Kaji, you bastard. I must kill you. You will never get the VIP card of Happy Street from me again in your life." Darren roared wildly in his heart, clenching and unclenching his fists, unclenching and clenching again. "That, Ashi." He opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say for a moment. Although Guillaume is jealous and has a bad temper, such girls are often easier to coax. On the contrary, Ashi, who looks weak on the surface, is actually soft on the outside and strong on the inside. Even if she gets angry, she is smiling, making it impossible for you to start. Tien Yushi smiled mischievously at this time. "So, I can't be less treated than Sister Guillaume." Darren was stunned. Before he could react, Ashi in front of him had already raised his hand to pull off the waist belt, and the white kimono slid down the smooth body like silk to the ground. Darren's mouth twitched wildly. No. Why is this plot so familiar again? But at this time, it has to work. 2 hours later. The Japanese tatami bed was in a mess, with clothes scattered all over the floor. Tien Yushi hung on Darren like a kitten, and fell asleep, with a happy and peaceful smile on his face. Darren lay there motionless, staring at the ceiling with a dull look. I always felt that this 90-point physique was not enough. A painful mask appeared on his face, and he pinched his temple subconsciously. I finally understand the difficulty of Kaji. Darren sighed, closed his eyes, and soon fell asleep. After a while, Tien Yushi, who had been asleep, suddenly trembled with long eyelashes, and slowly opened her eyes full of spring. She looked at Darren's profile with love, and a sly and proud arc appeared at the corner of her mouth. It doesn't matter, I won in the end. Her hand gently stroked her lower abdomen. The next day. The family compound of a commodore of a naval headquarters. Ah, I didn't mean it, Darren. I was wrong. Don't hit me in the face. Boom. A huge cloud of dust rose into the sky. Accompanied by a deafening roar, the entire luxurious mansion collapsed directly, and the land even sank. The earth was torn apart, and the main body of the building tilted and collapsed. The exaggerated movement immediately attracted the attention of many people in the Navy. What happened? Is this Commander Kaji's residence? Why did it collapse? Is it a pirate invasion? Prepare to fight back. Protect Commodore Kaji. Quote. Hundreds of Marines held their guns solemnly, set up camp, and stared at the dusty ruins of the building. Soon, a tall figure slowly walked out of it. Everyone was stunned. Is this Lieutenant General Darren? It turned out to be Lieutenant General Darren. Oh, that's okay. Quote. The Marines turned their heads away, pretending not to see this scene. Darren lifted Kaji's feet like a dead pig, threw the latter with a swollen face to the ground, and then sat on the latter's chest. Immediately, there were waves of pig-like wails. Stop shouting, or I'll kill you. Darren glared at him unhappily. Cake, who had a big bump on his head, was so scared that he immediately covered his mouth with both hands. Tell Admiral Sengoku that I am willing to double the compensation for all the losses. Darren said to a Navy soldier. Brew brew, brew brew. At this time, a rapid call of Den Den Mushi suddenly sounded. Darren frowned, took out the military Den Den Mushi, and connected the signal. I am Darren. The solemn voice of Sengoku came out, making the surrounding air stained with a layer of murderousness. Darren, come to the Marshal's mansion immediately. There is movement over there. From the Golden Lion. He has led the fleet to set off and is about to encircle and kill the Roger pirates in the New World. Darren was shocked when he heard this. It's finally coming. At the end of the 1494th year of the Sea Circle calendar, about half a year earlier than the original plot. The Battle of Etwall. I went to get the marriage certificate today, so I'm sorry for the late update. Chapter 93 Sniper Location. After receiving the call from Zhang, Darren did not delay too much and patted Jaji's swollen face. Hey, wake up quickly, it's time to fight. Kaji's eyes were still spinning, and he said in a daze. Fight? What kind of fight? He suddenly shivered, and his lips like sausages trembled and said. Aren't you done fighting? 2 lines of turbid tears oozed from his swollen eyes, looking extremely pitiful. Darren. Forget it. He said to the other Navy soldiers present. Send this guy to the military hospital, it's troublesome. Yes, Lieutenant General Darren. Please rest assured. The Navy soldiers raised their hands and saluted excitedly, as if they had received some supreme order. Darren smiled and nodded, and then rushed towards the direction of the Marshal's mansion without stopping. Along the way, he saw many Navy men in a hurry, with extremely solemn expressions. The closer he got to the Marshal's mansion, the more solemn the atmosphere became. A look of intense preparation for war. It seems that the headquarters is going to take real action this time. I guess Marshal Kong and General Zhang are also under great political pressure. This thought flashed through Darren's mind. In order to find clues to ancient weapons, the Golden Lion has wreaked havoc all over the world, destroying countless towns and ports. And every town he destroyed and every port he sank would bring more political pressure to the Navy. The chaos and destruction created by the Golden Lion on the sea will cause great panic among the people and countries, and this panic will naturally make their leaders and nobles put pressure on the world government and the Navy. The more the Golden Lion makes trouble, the more incompetent the Navy representing righteousness will appear. As a result, the pressure on Steel Bone Kong and Zhang Guo can be imagined. Now that they have finally caught an opportunity, they naturally don't want to miss it. The meeting between Golden Lion and Roger will definitely be a shocking war. The war between the largest pirate group of this era and the most elite pirate group of this era. If the Navy uses it properly and seizes the opportunity, it may be able to defeat these two legendary pirates. I just don't know if this war will break out in the Etwall Sea like the original plot. Darren lit a cigarette, his eyebrows gradually tightened. While thinking, Darren soon came to the Marshal's mansion in the central military fortress. Before he reached the door of the Navy Marshal's office, he heard the roar of Sengoku. Damn it, Garp. I haven't finished what I said yet. Then, the door of the office was suddenly pushed open heavily. Ha 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 ha, old man Kong, you haven't finished your words, but I have heard them all. Garp walked out of the office with a laugh, looking aggressive. Roger is about to step into the target sea area. If I don't go, he will run away. Speaking of Roger's name, Garp, a lazy guy, is like a chicken blood, full of fighting spirit. Hey, Darren boy, you are finally here. Ha 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 ha, Sengoku and others are waiting for you inside. Garp saw Darren in the corridor and greeted him with a smile. Darren smiled and said, Vice Admiral Garp is really full of energy. As soon as he finished speaking, an excited voice came from behind. You are worthy of being a hero of the Navy. Vice Admiral Garp dared to directly refuse the order of Marshal Kong, so cool. Without thinking, Darren knew that Kuzan was here after hearing this passionate and second-year line. Dazzling Kuzan boy. Garp waved his hand at Kuzan who was walking up the corridor, rolled his eyes, and said with a smile. Do you want to get on my ship? If it's a naval battle, your ability is still very useful. Kuzan's eyes suddenly lit up when he heard this, and his face flushed with excitement. Really, Vice Admiral Garp? Can I really get on your warship? Ha ha ha, Darren, did you see that? Mr. Garp recognized me. Darren smiled and said. Then you have to work harder, Kuzan. Encouraged by Darren, Kuzan was so excited that he trembled all over and raised his fist high. That's for sure. I will definitely catch up with you, Darren. Hey, Mr. Garp, wait for me. Kuzan turned around and saw that Garp had gone far away, so he hurriedly followed him, leaning forward. By the way, Mr. Garp, I heard that you refused the appointment of Admiral again. This is really too cool. Looking at the two jumping backs, and Bogart quietly holding a sword and waiting in the shadow of the corridor, Darren couldn't help laughing. Garp and Kuzan, these two guys can always make a very serious atmosphere very bad. Damn it, Garp, you bastard. At this time, the door of the Marshal's office was pushed open again, and Zhang Guo rushed out angrily, gritting his teeth. But seeing that Garp had run away, he could only be angry. General Zhang Guo. Darren greeted. Well, you are here, come in quickly. Warring States took a deep breath to suppress his anger and said to Darren. Without saying anything, Darren followed Warring States into the office. The office was filled with smoke. The senior generals of the Navy headquarters were smoking with frowns on their faces, their eyes fixed on the simulated sand table in front of them, clearly in a deadlock. Darren, you're just in time. Steelbone Sora raised his head and said seriously. Xiaohei, tell Darren about the latest intelligence. Staff Officer Crane nodded and said clearly. According to the latest intelligence, 5 hours ago, the Roger pirates officially entered the New World waters. On the other hand, the flying pirates fleet led by Golden Lion also landed on a commercial island in the New World for supplies 2 days ago. He did not intend to hide his tracks at all. Zhang Guo gritted his teeth and said gloomily. He is completely unscrupulous. Does he really think that a mere threat can make our navy afraid to act rashly? Borsellino smiled and teased. If it weren't for Vice Admiral Darren's advice, our headquarters would really be helpless. Zhang Guo. Vice Admiral Borsellino, once the war starts, your order is to prevent the Golden Lion from escaping. Zhang Guo gritted his teeth and turned his head to glare at Borsellino. Borsellino raised his hands in surrender and said helplessly. This is a difficult task, General Zhang Guo. I don't care. Warring States' eyes were red. Okay. Borsellino was helpless. Seeing this, Chief of Staff Crane shook his head and continued. The key question now is where the Golden Lion will choose to snipe the Roger pirates. Chapter 94. There's something wrong with his brain. While speaking, Chief of Staff Crane stretched out his hand and pointed in 3 directions on the simulated sand table. From the sailing direction of the Roger pirates, there are 3 regular routes. After analysis by the Intelligence Department, Roger is very likely to choose 2 of them. The first route points to the Kingdom of Dressrosa, and the other route points to the territory of the Big Mom pirates, the Wangguo Totland. We are now caught in a dilemma between these 2 routes. She looked up at Darren. Dressrosa is a well-known economic power in the New World. It is prosperous and wealthy. Roger's pirate group is very likely to resupply materials in this country. But similarly, Big Mom's Wangguo is also likely to be one of Roger's targets. Darren nodded in agreement and said, What Chief of Staff Crane said makes sense, but why do you look at me with such a weird look when you talk about Big Mom? And everyone here is the same. Darren's tone permeated with helplessness. I really don't know that crazy woman. Everyone turned their eyes away. Darren. He sighed and pointed to the 3rd route. Why don't you consider the possibility of this route? Everyone looked at the location Darren pointed to. On the simulated sand table, that location was a vast sea area that was deep and even close to black. At-wall sea area. Gang Gukong raised his eyebrows. Darren, do you know something? He could get from Darren's tone. As soon as these words came out, everyone looked at Darren again. As we all know, the currents in the At-wall sea are extremely complex, and are often mixed with various extreme and bad weather, which is extremely dangerous. Even the large navy would not rashly enter that mysterious and dangerous sea without being fully prepared. It is for this reason that the generals present immediately rejected the possibility of the 3rd route. After all, even the navy with strong ships and powerful guns may be defeated in that dangerous sea, let alone the pirate group. In fact, if the person who raised this doubt was not Darren, but another vice admiral, everyone present might have sneered. But they have not forgotten that the man in front of them is a man who has created countless miracles and made outstanding contributions. Although Vice Admiral Rogers Darren is notorious and has a bad record, he is definitely not a person who shoots without purpose in military planning and war decisions. I don't know anything. Darren shook his head. I just simply think that with Rogers' character, he shouldn't take the ordinary path. When these words came out, all the generals couldn't help but be stunned. The silent cyborg Kong's eyes flashed with a thoughtful light. Benkoku, Dressrosa, these places do have great possibilities. Darren continued. But don't forget, Roger's goal is not to defeat all the pirates, nor to plunder a huge amount of wealth. He is different from ordinary pirates. He pointed to his head. There is something wrong with his brain. Everyone. Although this sentence sounds very strange, they inexplicably feel that it makes a lot of sense. So Darren, all of your speculations are just speculations. Zhang Guo said at this time. It's not good to decide such an extremely important military action based on personal speculation without rational calculation and judgment, right? Darren smiled and said. General Warring states, I know that my judgment is indeed not based on rational and objective judgment, but Roger is just acting on personal preference. That's why I am more sure that he will choose a route that our Navy can't think of. If General Warring States doesn't believe it, we can do an experiment. Oh, Warring States was a little curious, what experiment? He didn't want to deliberately refute Darren's inference. But as a wise general, of the Navy, he has always been more inclined to use objective facts as a basis to formulate corresponding military strategies and decisions. And objectively speaking, whether it is Dressrosa or the 10,000 Kingdoms, the possibility of Roger's choice is far greater than the dangerous at Walsee. Darren's smile showed a meaningful meaning. Under the gaze of the crowd, he took out a military Den Den Mushi from his arms and dialed a signal. Brew brew. Just as the Den Den Mushi called, Darren sat down calmly, lit a cigar, and smiled. As we all know, the Navy and pirates are born opposites and are absolutely incompatible. There are many strong men among pirates, but Roger is undoubtedly the most dazzling one. And in our Navy, there are also generals. And the most worthy of the strongest Marine is undoubtedly Vice Admiral Garp. Vice Admiral Garp, as the person who has fought Roger the most times, must be the one who knows him best. Hearing this, the generals present couldn't help but nod their heads frequently to show their agreement. Darren was very satisfied with their reaction. At this time, the Den Den Mushi signal was finally connected. Garp's impatient voice came out. Hey, I'm Garp. Darren, what do you want to see me for? I'm busy going out to sea. Darren smiled. I'm sorry, Vice Admiral Garp. I want to ask you a question. Go ahead, hurry up, don't talk so much nonsense. Kuzan, you bastard. Don't steal my donuts. Garp started to curse. Everyone. Darren wiped the sweat from his forehead helplessly and asked. Vice Admiral Garp, you said before that you were going to arrest Roger. Do you know Roger's specific location? How do I know about this kind of thing? Didn't Sengoku say there are 3 routes? Just listen to him, he has the best brain, and I'm good at fists. Garp said impatiently. Darren asked again. Then Vice Admiral Garp, which route do you plan to take to defeat Roger? Garp blurted out, at Walsee. Oh, why? Why are you so talkative? I don't know, I just feel that he will appear there. Okay, I won't say any more. If I continue, I will finish all the donuts. Damn Kuzan, I shouldn't have let you get on board. Gaga. The communication of Den Den Mushi was interrupted. There was silence in the whole office. Darren raised his head and looked around with a smile. Do you understand? Zhongguo's mouth twitched. Okay, you are indeed a person with a problem in your brain. Chapter 95. The commander is. So, do you have any questions? Darren Loon exhaled a long stream of smoke. The other generals looked at each other, and subconsciously smiled bitterly, tacitly agreeing with Darren's judgment. If there is some kind of magical bond and destiny on this sea, then I believe no one will question the fate between Garp and Roger. These two enemies who have been entangled since the Battle of God Valley. If even Vice Admiral Garp can't guess Roger's thoughts, then no one on this sea can guess Roger's thoughts. Yes, although this reason sounds very absurd and can't be measured by common sense at all. But as we all know, Roger has never been a pirate who can be described by common sense. Just like Vice Admiral Garp has never been a navy who can be described by common sense. So they all cast their eyes on General Sengoku. Sengoku. He glanced at Darren, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. This brat, you make me, a wise general, look stupid. Ahem. Vice Admiral Darren's judgment is indeed very convincing. Zhongguo coughed lightly, and said slowly without blushing. I also held a similar judgment at the beginning, but considering more rational and objective factors, so my thinking was disrupted. There was silence for a second. Then the admiral's heartfelt praises rang out in the office. General Waring States is indeed far-sighted. That's right, General Waring States is worthy of being our Navy's wise general. Vice Admiral Darren's judgment coincides with General Waring States. It's true that heroes come from young people. Looking at the generals talking to each other, staff officer, he couldn't help but turn his face away. Darren smiled, but didn't care. He didn't care about these so-called false names. He just needed the opinions of the Navy's top leaders to be unified, which was enough. If that's the case, then let's decide it this way. Kong Ji Kong slowly stood up from his chair, his broad hands supporting the desk, his sturdy and strong body leaned forward aggressively, and said in a stern tone. The elite troops of the Navy headquarters will set off immediately. Led by Admiral Sengoku of the Navy headquarters. At this point, his voice became decisive and unequivocal. Vice Admiral Borsalino. I'm here. Borsalino stood up with a smile. Vice Admiral Sakaski. I'm here. Sakaski responded with a cold and stern expression. And, Vice Admiral Rogers Darren. Darren stood up from his chair and saluted with a smile. Kong Ji Kong nodded at him, raised his head, and his powerful momentum and majesty continued to rise, and the wide marshal's cloak behind him fluttered without wind. The four of you will take the lead, lead a total of 10 warships and 10,000 elite troops, and immediately enter the Etwall Sea and wait for the right opportunity. Bang! Steelbone Kong slammed his fist on the desk. Defeat the Feikong pirates and the Roger pirates. Swish. After the voice fell, all the naval generals present stood up in unison, saluted solemnly, and said loudly. Yes, Marshal Kong. Then Marshal Kong, who is the specific commander of this mission. At this time, Borsalino suddenly raised a question with a smile. Since we are waiting for the right opportunity to launch an attack, it seems that we must have a temporary commander, right? Yes. Steelbone Kong nodded in agreement, then the temporary commander of this mission. His eyes subconsciously moved to Sengoku. Sensing the look of Kong and others, Zongguo couldn't help but proudly straighten his chest, with a faint smile on his lips. At this moment, his heart was full of confidence. After all, this definitely didn't need to be discussed. He was the only admiral of the Navy headquarters and one of the strongest fighters of the world government. Plus, as a wise general, commanding operations on the battlefield was his advantage and strength. Let Lieutenant General Darren take charge. Marshal Kong, please rest assured. I will definitely take on the responsibility of this mission. The smile on Zongguo's face froze. His expression changed rapidly, and he changed his words forcibly. Do a good job of supervising Vice Admiral Darren. Steelbone Kong looked at him, and after a second of silence, he said, Then I'll trouble you, Sengoku. Steelbone Kong squeezed out a stiff smile. For justice. Steelbone Kong nodded, and his eyes finally fell on Darren, and he cast an encouraging look and asked. Vice Admiral Darren, do you feel too much pressure? A confident arc appeared at the corner of Darren's mouth. I've been waiting for this day for a long time, Marshal Kong. Hearing this, Sengoku's heart skipped a beat. And Steelbone Kong looked at Darren deeply. At the same time. New World. It was raining heavily and the wind was howling. The Oro Jackson was sailing on the turbulent sea, and the huge waves on the sea surface pushed the pirate ship once again, the deck and mast creaked under the weight. Captain Roger. The intersection of 3 routes is ahead. Which way should we go next? Shanks's tender face was whitened by the cold rain, and he asked with trembling teeth. Do I need to think about it? It must be Dressrosa. Baki held the mast tightly with both hands to prevent his stick-like body from being thrown out, and shouted in fear. On one side is Totland, the land of the Big Mom pirates. We'll die if we go in. On the other side is Dressrosa, a tropical climate and rich and prosperous place. As long as we get there, we can have as much money as we want. Baki was particularly excited when talking about money, and even the fear on his face was reduced a lot. The other members also looked at the figure in the red captain's coat at the bow. Dressrosa and Banco. Roger wiped the rain off his face and laughed. Forget about that crazy bitch Charlotte Linlin. She's not interesting. As for Dressrosa. He fumbled with his 2 tufts of nose hair like beard, and suddenly seemed to think of something. He pointed to the deep sea in front of him that was shrouded by a storm and asked curiously. Is that the 3rd route? After hearing this question, before anyone else could say anything, Buggy was the first to jump out and objected excitedly. No way. Captain Roger. The sea ahead is the Etwall Sea. This is one of the most dangerous seas in the New World. It is said that only 1 out of 10 pirate groups can pass through this sea. It's too dangerous there. Baki's mouth was covered tightly by Shanks, who was full of anxiety. But it was too late. When Roger heard Buggy's introduction, his eyes suddenly lit up with an extremely hot light. The most dangerous sea area. Only 1 in 10 survives. Ha 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 ha. This is really great. I've decided. Roger stepped on the bow of the ship and drew his knife, with the tip of the knife pointing directly at the sea shrouded in haze ahead. Let's choose this route. Bucky was struck by lightning, and his eyes almost popped out. Shanks covered his face in pain. You shouldn't have said it, Buggy. Others were also helpless. Our captain is really sick in the brain. Chapter 96 Deep Sea. Everything in front of him was a dark place with no end in sight. This is the deep sea. On the bow of the warship, Darren stroked the stubble on his chin with interest, observing the scene in front of him. The warships were wrapped in a layer of transparent film. 10 warships sailed slowly towards the destination in a relatively stable formation, silently. What came into view was pitch black. Only when the searchlight on the warship occasionally swept over could you see the deep seabed, the reefs in the deep sea and the colorful corals. There were not many sounds around, and the silence made people feel scalp tingling. And the low shouts that seemed to come from some strange creatures from time to time in the darkness, as well as the huge black shadows that loomed, were even more creepy. In this deep sea where you can't see your hand in front of you, if you have claustrophobia, you would have fainted directly. Hee Darren boy, haven't you used the coding method to dive into the deep sea before? Zhang Guo walked to the side of the Vice Admiral of the Navy at some point and asked with a smile. Darren shook his head and smiled. Really not, General Zhang Guo. You are very clear about every mission I have taken since leaving the North Sea. There has never been such an opportunity. And when I was serving in the North Sea, I didn't need to use such a complicated navigation method. In that sea area, we prefer to use a head-on approach to roughly decide the battle situation. Ha 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 ha, in that case, you have to experience it well. Zhang Guo couldn't help but laugh triumphantly. Although the coding technology is now quite mature, there are still great risks. After all, the water pressure in the deep sea is very high. And only our Navy headquarters can have such perfect coding technology. While speaking, he stretched out his hand and pressed towards the transparent film in front of him, leaving an exaggerated palm print on it. Did you see that? Even in such a deep sea of 10,000 meters, the coating is squeezed to such an extent, and there will be no damage. Just this point alone is definitely not comparable to the inferior coating of those pirates. When the last sentence came out, Zhang Guo's braids and beard were about to stand up with pride. So that's it. Darren made a look of sudden enlightenment. But why do we use the coding method to dive into the deep sea? Zhang Guo smiled proudly. You are still too young, Darren boy. He put his hands behind his back and talked freely. Although the character of the Golden Lion guy is arrogant, no one, but at the same time he is very cautious and makes plans before taking action. If these 10 warships of our Navy enter the New World without any disguise, it is estimated that they will be noticed by many forces in the New World soon after entering the New World. The large-scale entry of the Navy into the New World will inevitably arouse the vigilance of countless pirates and dark forces, and this news is also very likely to be known by the Golden Lion. In this way, he may be prepared, and it is very likely that our action will fail in the end. Darren nodded in agreement. General Zhang Guo is indeed far-sighted, and I admire him. Zhang Guo glanced at him and said. But you are the commander of this mission, so I can't give too many opinions. Darren boy, if it were you, how would you enter the New World silently? I can fly. Warring states. He gritted his teeth and said. You can fly, but the fleet can't fly. Darren nodded, then shook his head and said. It's actually possible, as long as the headquarters provides sufficient financial support to make lightweight and metal transformation of the headquarters, warships. Although my ability is extremely limited, I can still make 10 ships fly long distances. Warring States clenched his fists. His chest began to rise and fall rapidly, veins popped out on his forehead, and he gritted his teeth and said. Now the headquarters is short of military funds, how can we get funds from outside the district to transform warships? I see. Darren suddenly realized, again, and sighed helplessly. Then there is no way. But General Waring states, it seems that there is no time when our headquarters is not short of military funds, right? Waring states. His old face flushed red in an instant, and then turned blue and purple. His lips trembled for a moment, but he couldn't get angry in the end. He just turned his head and roared in another direction. Borsellino, you bastard. It's so late and you're still lying on the beach chair in the sun. This is the deep sea, where is the sun? Borsellino in the distance put down the watermelon juice in his hand, raised his hands in surrender, and said innocently. I'm not basking in the sun, General Waring states. I just want to lie down for a while. Waring states. He covered his heart with his hand, and walked into the cabin with a miserable back. Darren couldn't help but smile. Seeing Waring states walk into the cabin and confirming that there was no one around, he slowly took out a military den mushi and dialed a signal. Is that guy here? The signal was connected, and Darren asked with a smile. A low laugh with a smile came from the den mushi. Yeah, I've been here. But you're really stingy, Darren. Darren shrugged and said. His imagination is limited, it's not my fault. The low voice paused for a moment, and asked in a deep voice. Are you sure this time? Darren stared at the endless deep sea in front of him with burning eyes, and sneered. We've been beaten to our doorstep. If we don't fight back, it would be too unreasonable. In the Battle of Marineford, if that meteorite had deviated a little more, it might have hit Ashy. The man was silent for a moment, and spoke again. Your style is to take revenge and take revenge. Since you have decided to take action, I have no worries on my side. Then I will wait for your news in the North Sea. Okay. Darren hung up the den mushi directly. He put away the den mushi and raised his head. He could clearly feel that the warship under his feet had begun to float up. It was getting closer and closer to the sea surface. Until a trace of wind and rain came into his eyes, completely covering the madness and determination in his pupils. Is it the Battle of Etwall? This time, the protagonists are not you two. Recently, I have been too busy, starting to run around hotels and book wedding banquets. Sorry for the late update. Chapter 97 Legendary Battle. Etwall Sea Area. The sea surface was windy, the waves were surging, and heavy rain fell from the sky. Ah! On the Oro Jackson, Buggy's red nose turned pale with fear, and he hugged the pillar with horror, screaming as he watched the terrifying scene in front of him. The ship of the Roger pirates was in the vast and bumpy sea. Under the shroud of the storm. There were already a large number of pirate ships floating densely on the sea surface in front of, behind, and on the left and right of the pirate ship, and even in the sky in front of it, like buoys covering the entire sea surface, which was daunting. The Flying Lion pirate flags fluttered in the wind and rain, exuding an indescribable sense of oppression and overwhelming domineering. What are you afraid of, Buggy? Next to him, Shanks, who was wearing a straw hat, grabbed the mast with one hand and teased. Anyway, you have become unkillable no matter how you cut it. Damn it. Baki's hands left his body and grabbed Shanks' collar tightly, his eyes spitting fire and roaring. I still have many weaknesses, bastard. You idiot. If it weren't for you, how could I become a landlubber? Shanks just grinned. Damn it. Baki was so angry that he was shaking all over, but at this time he didn't care too much, and he rolled and crawled to Rayleigh's side, crying and screaming. Mr. Rayleigh, you should persuade Captain Roger. That's the Golden Lion, we have been completely surrounded. In a naval battle, that bastard is invincible. Rayleigh smiled disapprovingly, and said helplessly. Bucky, you also know Roger's character. The more you emphasize this, the more excited he will be. Besides. He patted the railing of the hull. Although this is a naval battle, we must also believe in the Oro Jackson that Tom built for us. Baki was struck by lightning when he heard this. His face looked like he had eaten shit. He subconsciously looked at the other crew members with a look of help, but found that they were standing in the wind and rain, drawing their swords, looking eager to fight, and immediately collapsed. It's over, it's over. This time it's really over. Baki fell directly to the ground, holding his head with both hands, his eyes desperate and dull. Everyone is crazy. Barrett is still smart. If I had known, I would have followed him to get off the ship in advance. Others ignored the wailing of Buggy. They all drew their weapons, adjusted their breathing, and looked at the huge pirate fleet on the sea and in the sky, with a happy smile on their faces. This is Captain Roger. No, it's their last journey. Whether it's this at Walsea or the flying pirate group led by the Golden Lion in front of them, it's impossible for them to retreat. Shaki. Heavy footsteps came from behind the crowd. Roger, wearing a blood-red captain's coat, stepped past the crowd and walked to the bow. The heavy rain soaked his clothes thoroughly, and the water splashed down his coat, rippling circles on the deck. Bang! Roger stepped on the bow with one foot, raised his head with high eyes, and looked directly at the pirate fleet covering the sky in front of him. This was indeed a shocking scene that made people terrified. The pirate fleets on the sea and in the sky were looming in the wind and rain, like a hungry wolf pack chasing a thin and injured old man. The Tiger was completely surrounded and ready to move. The black heavy guns on the pirate ship exuded the smell of gunpowder. Under the control of the pirates, they adjusted the direction and angle, and the gun barrels were aimed directly at the Oro Jackson. The members of the Fekong pirates even showed ferocious grins, and looked at the Roger pirates as if they were a group of dead people. Roger. At this time, a sharp and unruly laugh suddenly came from the sea of clouds flashing with thunder. A figure suddenly flew out, and his golden hair as long as his feet was like a lion's mane, fluttering in the wind. He was biting a lit cigar in his mouth, his hands on his chest, and his eyes looked down at the people of the Roger pirates below with a domineering look, grinning. Ha 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 ha, I've been waiting for you for a long time. As he laughed, waves of deep and majestic terrifying auras were released from his seemingly thin and frail body, turning into a substantial storm, constantly crushing and shattering the sea of clouds, leaving traces in the rain. Captain of the Flying Pirates, Overlord of the New World. Admiral Flying, Golden Lion Shaki. What a terrifying aura, almost suffocating. Baki felt the aura surging like mountains and seas, and his face trembled palely. That guy is so scary. Captain Roger. Are we really not going to run away? Roger grinned. Shaki, long time no see. He pointed to the murderous pirate fleet in front of him. Is this how you welcome me? Golden Lion grinned. Don't play dumb, Roger. You should know why I came to you. Roger scratched his head and asked in confusion. I really don't know. Golden Lion. He gritted his teeth. Ancient weapons. You have clues to ancient weapons, don't you? Hearing this, everyone in Roger's pirate group was stunned. Baki's face changed drastically, and he suddenly had a bad feeling. Roger widened his eyes in surprise. How come even you know that I have clues to ancient weapons? Baki. He burst into tears instantly. Rayleigh and others covered their faces in pain. Admit it. Golden Lion was stunned for a moment. He originally wanted to force Roger to say it, but he didn't expect that as soon as he opened his mouth, this guy directly admitted it. This is different from what he expected. He was stunned for several seconds before he reacted, and suddenly laughed wildly. Ha 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 ha. Very good. I thought you wouldn't admit it. In that case, let's join forces. Golden Lion stared at Roger with scorching eyes and grinned. Although we had many grievances when we were young, let's forget all of these things. With the ancient weapons that you know can destroy the world, plus the huge military force and power in my hands. He raised his right hand high and clenched it into a fist. We can definitely dominate this world. No matter what navy it is, or the self-righteous world government, they will crawl at our feet. Become my right arm, Roger. Boom. A pale thunder tore through the dark storm, illuminating the turbulent sea for a moment, reflecting the vague shadows of 10 warships. The warships were deployed in a defensive formation, using the bad weather as a cover to hide perfectly on the sea several miles away from the 2 major pirate groups. The temperament was slightly wretched. It's about to begin. On the main battleship, Darren, wearing a rain cloak, stood on the bow with a cigar in his mouth, looking at the looming sea in the distance, and slowly exhaled a stream of smoke from the corners of his raised mouth. In stark contrast to his calmness, Zhang Guo, who was holding a telescope, was anxious. Golden Lion and Roger are going to join forces. Chapter 98 Shiji vs Roger. Listening to the laughter of the Golden Lion in the wind and rain, Zhongguo was so anxious that cold sweat oozed from his forehead. Golden Lion, who was ambitious to conquer the world, actually proposed to join forces with Roger. When Zhongguo thought that these two most troublesome enemies of the navy might form an alliance, he couldn't help but sweat. The most terrifying thing is that Roger actually knows the clues of ancient weapons. How is this possible? Others don't understand, but how can Zhongguo not know? Roger has clues to ancient weapons, is a false news. It was a smokescreen released by their navy from the beginning. But Zhongguo never expected that the false news released by Darren's insidious trick actually became true. What is this? Zhongguo suddenly turned his head, his eyes fixed on the vice admiral next to him. Darren, did you know from the beginning that Roger had the clues to the ancient weapons? Darren said innocently. How is this possible, General Zhongguo? How could I know a secret that even you, the admiral of the navy, don't know? I was just talking casually, I never thought it was true. Zhongguo observed the changes in Darren's expression with suspicion, but in the end he didn't find any tricks. He thought about it and gradually accepted this explanation. Yes, how could Darren know about this kind of thing? But, Darren, when are you going to order the attack? Zhongguo clenched his fists, looking anxious. We must not let them continue to negotiate. What if Roger really agreed to Shichi's proposal? Don't worry, General Zhongguo. Darren shook his head and interrupted Zhongguo's words, with a relaxed smile on his lips. With Roger's personality, he will never accept the invitation of the Golden Lion. Hearing the confidence in Darren's tone, Zhongguo was slightly stunned. Are you sure? How do you know Roger won't agree? You are not that idiot Garb. Darren smiled but said nothing. Wait a little longer, don't be in a hurry, General Zhongguo. They will fight. The eyes of the Vice Admiral flashed with a mysterious and determined smile. Definitely. As if infected by Darren's confidence, Zhongguo felt a little calmer for no reason, but the expression on his face still retained disbelief. Rule the world. The heavy rain slapped Roger's hair, cheeks and clothes unscrupulously, making crackling sounds. Looking at the dozens of pirate ships that kept approaching the Oro Jackson, he shook his head gently, with a mocking smile on the corner of his mouth. You are still the same as before, you haven't changed at all, Shiki. He suddenly raised his head. The fine black hair lifted up a large piece of rain curtain, his eyes were fiery and he faced the wind and rain, and laughed heroically. Rule. Ha 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 Shiki, I have no interest in ruling. If you can't do what you want to do, then what's the point of being a pirate? Your proposal, I refuse. Golden Lion's eyes suddenly turned cold when he heard it, and he exuded an undisguised murderous intent. His expression became ferocious, and anger surged from his chest. So, you mean to let me sink you into the sea here, right? He slowly pulled out the double swords at his waist. The rain slid down the sharp blade, and finally gathered at the tip of the sword, flashing cold light. Although Roger stopped the Rocks pirates in the God Valley War, and he had fought with him many times, Golden Lion had mixed feelings towards Roger. On the one hand, he respected Roger's strength, but on the other hand, they had also forged a lot of hatred. This time, he extended an olive branch to Roger, largely because of this mutual appreciation feeling. Of course, there are also practical issues involved. Roger's strength is too strong to be underestimated. Even as arrogant as Golden Lion, he had to admit Roger's strength. Even in this naval battle where he had the upper hand, he was not absolutely sure that he could defeat Roger. Jia. That's why he proposed the suggestion of joining forces. But he didn't expect that Roger, this idiot, would reject him without even thinking about it. No. Roger laughed wildly. With a clang, he suddenly pulled out the long sword from his waist, and the tip of the sword pointed directly at the Golden Lion in the sky. The momentum on his body was like a mountain rising from the ground, climbing up endlessly. I mean to kill all of you. As soon as the voice fell, the pupils of the Golden Lion and Roger suddenly burst into a terrifying red light. Swish, swish, swish. Tear. Thousands of lightning bolts, like dense light and shadow, burst out black and red phantoms, and burst out from the bodies of the two people facing each other at the same time. The majestic and boundless momentum collided fiercely, like a real storm, turning into a visible energy cyclone, constantly crushing. The sky and the earth changed color. The world was only black and blood red. The wind was blowing hard, and the sea of clouds was torn apart. The faces of the members of Roger's pirate group changed slightly, raised one hand to cover their cheeks, and subconsciously took 2 steps back. Baki and Shanks turned pale, and knelt on the deck with a plop. As for the Fekong pirates, the densely packed pirates rolled their eyes, and fainted directly. The sea was churning, and the world was violently turbulent because of the momentum of these two people. This is the top-level domineering color domineering collision in the air. Ha 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 ha. Come on, Shiki. With a bang, Roger laughed and stepped on the bow. The figure wearing a blood-red captain's coat rose up like a madman, like an unstoppable god of war, holding the seemingly ordinary long sword in both hands, and jumped up. Zzzzz. The black and red lightning burst like a beam and erupted crazily on the blade. From a distance, it seemed as if Roger was dragging a thunderbolt to attack. You are courting your own destruction. The golden lion roared, and the figure first jumped back, and then began to dive at an extremely fast speed. The same black and red lightning wrapped around the 2 swords in his hands. The peerless swords, Sakura 10, and Dead Wood, turned into the arrogant lion fangs at this moment, emitting a cold light. The 2 swords crossed and lay in front of him. The black and red air waves wrapped around the figure of the flying lion and flew in a spiral. The 2 rushed towards each other with unimaginable speed and oppression. Come on, Shiki. Die, Roger. Shiki. Roger. Shiki. Roger. Boom. The next moment. Like a meteor hitting the earth, the 2 strongest pirates in the world named Legend collided heavily in the sky. The world stopped for a moment. Then the boundless and majestic air waves spread out crazily, rolling up huge waves tens of meters high, radiating towards the distant sea surface. The sky collapsed and the sea split. The aggressive air wave hit them in the face, and even though they were several miles away, the camp composed of 10 warships shook violently and was hit loose. You were right, Darren boy. Zhongguo grabbed the railing in front of him tightly, his eyes filled with anxious bloodshot, and shouted. They are fighting. Quickly order an attack. I wish you all a happy new year. Chapter 99 Golden Lion Must Die. Zhongguo's unusual anxiety made Darren frown and asked. General Zhongguo, with your wisdom, it should not be difficult to see that this is the time when Golden Lion and Roger are fighting fiercely. It is not a good time to order an attack now. Darren looked at Zhongguo with a hint of confusion and doubt. Although the timeline is still quite early, Zhongguo is only the general of the headquarters, and he has not grown into the resourceful, amazing and powerful admiral of the Navy in the future. Both his scheming and vision are limited to this era, and have not reached the peak level of the war at the top. But even so, his reaction should not be so unbearable. Of course, I know that now is not the best time to launch a general offensive. Hearing Darren's words, Zhongguo gritted his teeth and a tangled look appeared on his face. According to normal tactics and intelligence analysis, the best time is of course to wait until the 2 pirate groups fight each other until both are defeated, and then our navy will come out to clean up the situation. But Darren, this is only the most perfect and ideal situation. There was gloom and solemnity in Sengoku's eyes. What is more likely to happen is that our navy may be discovered by them at any time. The longer the time is delayed, the greater the possibility of being discovered. Darren. Sengoku turned his head to look at Darren and said worriedly. We can't wait any longer. The Navy headquarters can't afford such a risk. Darren was stunned. Looking at the bloodshot around Sengoku's pupils, he realized something in an instant. Political pressure. The destruction that the Golden Lion has caused all over the world in the past period of time has created extremely heavy political pressure on the Navy headquarters. Whether it is the member countries or non-member countries, or even the world government, it is estimated that they have been constantly put pressure on the Navy, especially Sengoku, the admiral of the Navy headquarters who was responsible for arresting Golden Lion. Sengoku, who has been under such pressure, is obviously not in a good state. It is estimated that he has not slept for many days. Golden Lion is cautious, dangerous, and extremely difficult to deal with. This guy can easily avoid the intelligence network of the Navy and the government with his own devil fruit ability and perfectly hide his whereabouts. It is precisely because of this that the Navy has no way to deal with him. As for the current situation, the longer the time drags on, the more likely he is to discover the ambush of the Navy and retreat directly before the Navy reacts. So for Sengoku, even if it is not the best time to attack, he can't risk waiting. Seize this opportunity, even if it has to face the risk of facing two legendary pirate groups at the same time, the Navy must take action. No wonder. Darren suddenly understood in his heart and couldn't help but sigh. This is where he neglected. He only cares about maximizing benefits and tactical victory, but forgets the overall strategic issues. However, this is understandable. If you are not in the position, do not meddle in other people's affairs. General Sengoku, I understand. I admit that your opinion is important. Darren lit a brand new cigar and said lightly. Sengoku's eyes lit up. But I refuse. Darren said without hesitation. Sengoku. This damn brat. The confident and proud voice of the Vice Admiral of the Navy slowly spread in the storm. I am just a Vice Admiral of the Navy, not an Admiral, let alone a Marshal of the Navy. It is your duty, General Sengoku, to withstand political pressure, not mine. I have only one duty. Darren stared at the sea in the distance, which was gradually covered by blood and gunpowder. Countless tragic wails and deafening artillery roars came from that direction. Corpses were tossed in the huge waves, and the torn pirate ship sank into the sea. A world-shaking battle was taking place over there. Darren exhaled a long stream of smoke like a dragon, and sneered. Lead the Navy to the final victory of this war. Zhongguo's pupils shrank. Final victory. This kid is too confident. He waited so confidently. What is he waiting for? Or does he have any backhands and trump cards that he hasn't used yet? But the elite and high-end combat power of the Navy headquarters have basically been exhausted. Marshal Kong must be stationed in Marineford and guard the Holy Land of Marihoa. Zepha will not participate in military affairs and stay in the training camp to prepare for the next training camp. It can be said without hesitation that the high-end combat power that the Navy can send has basically been invested in this war. Darren can't have any other hidden trump cards. Wait. Zhongguo's pupils suddenly shrank. You want to kill Golden Lion directly? Darren glanced at him and asked in confusion. Don't you think so? Zhongguo paused and pondered. Golden Lion's ability is too difficult to deal with. If he encounters an absolute danger, that guy will definitely abandon his fleet and escape alone without hesitation. I have discussed this issue with Marshal Kong privately before. Considering this factor, the main goal of this operation is actually to annihilate the living forces of the Fakon pirates. In addition, it is to give priority to the crusade against Roger pirates. After all, Roger pirates can't fly. But Golden Lion can. The difficulty of crusade between the two is not at the same level at all. So that's it. Darren's mouth curled up a mocking smile. This is really a pity. He understood what Zhongguo meant. Golden Lion himself is too difficult to crusade, but his fleet is different. The most important point is that as long as the Golden Lion's flying fleet is annihilated like last time, the Navy will have a good explanation to the world government and the major member states. Politics. It's still this damn politics. Our views are somewhat different, General Sengoku. A gloomy murderous intent burst out from Darren's eyes. In my opinion, Roger can be put aside for this operation. But, Golden Lion must die. Sengoku was shocked when he heard this. He looked at Darren in astonishment. From the eyes of the Vice Admiral in front of him, he did not see the opposition between justice and evil, the excitement of fighting pirates, and no sense of responsibility. There was only pure hatred. From the beginning of the plan to spread false information to the arrangement of this war, Darren had only one goal from beginning to end. Not Roger, not Golden Lion's flying fleet. This kid just wants to kill Golden Lion. He really holds a grudge. Zhang Guo shuddered for no reason. Don't let Darren remember you in the future, or you won't be able to sleep well. This thought popped up in his mind. Then you have to wait until when? Seeing that the war in the distance had begun to enter a white-hot stage, the figures of Roger and Golden Lion turned into red and golden entangled in the air, bursting out with terrifying turbulence, and Sengoku couldn't help asking. The question is not when to wait, but what to wait for. Darren smiled meaningfully. Believe me, General Sengoku. His eyes were extremely unruly. Justice, victory. Kill. Kill them. Kill Roger, and our flying pirates will be able to dominate the world. Ha 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 ha. The pirates' grim laughter continued to sound in the wind and rain, mixed with the roar of artillery and the collision of swords. As Roger and Golden Lion officially fought, the flying pirates also completely sounded the signal for war. The cannons spit out flames crazily, and dense shells cut through the rain curtain, turning into an impenetrable death net, covering the Oro Jackson. Protect the Jackson. Rayleigh's eyes narrowed, and he shouted in a solemn tone, and his figure jumped up from the deck first. The silver-white long sword in his hand suddenly came out of its sheath, slashing out a brilliant moonlight. Swish, swish, swish. More than a dozen silver sword rays flashed in the air, splitting dozens of shells in half, and then exploded. Happy New Year. Chapter 100 Waiting for the Wind to Rise. The sky was full of flames, black smoke was billowing, and heat waves were coming from the top of the head. The Oro Jackson under his feet shook violently under the impact of the explosion, as if it would capsize at any time. Damn it! Their firepower is too fierce. Jabba didn't care about the rain splashing on his face, and swung out two silver axes at the same time, cutting several shells that were about to hit the mast into pieces. Other members of Roger's pirate group also used their own tricks to shoot down all the shells that might threaten the pirate ship. Boom boom. Countless shells exploded on the sea around Oro Jackson, raising large columns of water and making the pirate ship creak. It's really over now. Such fierce artillery fire. Baki screamed and trembled, with snot spraying out of his nose. But no matter how he shouted, his movements were not slow at all. He didn't see where he took out the throwing knife, but he swung it like a windmill with both hands and hit several shells with incredible accuracy. Bucky, stop shouting, you're so noisy. Shanks' face turned pale and he gasped for breath. A fierce buzzing sound approached from behind him. He suddenly pulled out a half-meter-long pocket knife and slashed it behind him. Swish. The black shell split into two halves, whizzed past his body and sank into the sea. Boom. The explosion caused a fire, and Shanks gasped for breath, but his eyes were extremely firm, and his hand holding the knife never trembled. If Darren was here, he would probably be able to see at a glance. Whether it was Buggy or Shanks, these two guys had grown a lot compared to the first time they met. Especially Shanks wearing a straw hat, just based on the heat of the knife just now, he was at least at the level of cutting steel. You know, he was only 12 years old. At the age of 12, he was close to the realm of a swordsman. This talent is unique in the world. Rayleigh glanced at the noisy Buggy and the calm Shanks, and a gratified smile flashed in his eyes. They have all grown up, these two little guys. That's good. At least in this way, after this last adventure, these two little ghosts will also be qualified to freely explore the sea. While thinking about it, Rayleigh has swung his sword again. The sword energy slashed up like a hurricane, engulfing countless shells falling from the sky, exploding in the sky, giving birth to a roaring fire tornado. It's endless. Kuroka's, holding the harpoon, had a solemn look in his eyes. The rain messed up his unique flower crown hairstyle, and he looked very embarrassed. The Golden Lion guy didn't fight us at all. Everyone's heart sank when they heard this. Looking up, the sea and sky were swaying in the wind and rain. Pirate ships flying the skull flag of the flying pirates had completely surrounded them. They did not rush up rashly, but instead used the advantage of firepower to suppress the Roger pirates. This suppression constantly consumed their physical strength, making the Roger pirates exhausted. Under this fierce baptism of artillery fire, the legendary pirate ship Oro Jackson was like a swaying boat in the wind and rain, and it could be destroyed at any time. "We can't go on like this." Rayleigh glanced at Roger and Golden Lion fighting in the sky, and made a decision in an instant. He wiped the rain off his face and gritted his teeth and said, "Just go over." As soon as the voice fell, the helmsman immediately took action. The sails were raised, and under the impact of the wind and rain, the Oro Jackson suddenly accelerated. It crashed into the huge pirate fleet on the sea ahead. "I'll lead the way." Rayleigh appeared at the bow in a flash, his eyes fixed, and he slashed out with a sword. Swish! The sword energy that rubbed like the moonlight suddenly shot out, like a huge crescent moon, whistling across the sea. The sea surface hundreds of meters ahead was instantly torn open, a huge crack. A 10-meter-high pirate ship suddenly stagnated, then split into two parts from the center, exploded, and sank into the sea. The pirates' painful howls continued to sound, and countless figures of the flying pirates jumped from the burning pirate ship and fell into the sea like dumplings. Taking advantage of this sudden chaos, the Oro Jackson, like a sharp ship breaking the ice, plunged into the encirclement of the Golden Lion's fleet. "Kill!" A deafening shout sounded. Countless ropes were thrown from midair and landed on the deck of the Oro Jackson. The members of the flying pirates climbed along the ropes with a grim smile, scrambling to shout and kill. "Here we come!" The eyes of the Roger pirates burst into a strong fighting spirit, took a deep breath, raised their knives. Fearlessly met. This is their last voyage. How can it stop here? The boarding battle officially broke out. Darren, it's time to take action. On the main battleship, Sakaski's figure suddenly jumped down, staring at Darren with cold eyes. "The boarding battle has already broken out. Now we directly surround them. It's hard to say whether Golden Lion can defeat the Roger pirates, but it will definitely force the Roger pirates into a desperate situation." At this moment, even though he was always cold and deep, he was getting impatient. The tone was full of stern questioning. Zhongguo also looked at Darren anxiously. When the boarding battle broke out, the two major pirate groups were already in a melee. If they surrounded them now, they would definitely be able to create amazing results. "No, wait a little longer." Darren observed the movements on the battlefield, frowned, and subconsciously clenched his fists. "Damn it!" Zhongguo cursed in his heart. But he could only stare blankly. After all, Darren was the commander of this operation. "Tell me, what are you waiting for?" Thick black smoke began to come out of Sakaski's body, and his eyes were gloomy and stern. Darren sighed and turned to look at Sakaski. "Sakaski, you and I have worked together in the North Sea for a long time, and you should know me very well. I only ask you one question." He looked at Sakaski deeply. "Do you believe me?" Sakaski fell silent immediately. He clenched his fists, but the black smoke on his body gradually dissipated. "I hope you won't regret the decision you made, Darren." Darren smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'm ready." He looked back at the battlefield in the distance. At this moment, Roger's pirates have completely fallen into a desperate situation. Although everyone on their ship is a powerful person on this sea, their number is too far compared to the Kiku pirates. The fleet led by Golden Lion has dozens of warships and tens of thousands of troops. Such a large force can kill them even if they are piled up with people. Especially in such a dangerous environment, once the flying pirates ignore sacrifices and use human lives to fill the gap, the defeat of the Roger pirates is only a matter of time. After all, they must always protect the Oro Jackson. Although the members of the Roger pirates are basically not devil fruit users, in such a dangerous environment and sea, the destruction of the ship means the death of people. "Get ready." Zhongguo and Sakaski were stunned at the same time when they heard the words, with doubts on their faces. Borsellino, who was lying behind him and drinking watermelon juice, raised a meaningful smile at the corner of his mouth, and a faint light flashed under his sunglasses. "What exactly have you prepared and what are you waiting for?" Zhongguo couldn't help asking again. Darren smiled. Wait for the wind to rise. Wait for the wind to rise. Zhang Guo was stunned, his eyebrows were knitted, and then his face changed slightly as if he understood something. An incredible thought came to his mind. The voice of the Vice Admiral of the Navy was full of domineering, and it seemed solemn in the wind and rain. I prepared a big gift for the Golden Lion. A crazy arc appeared at the corner of his mouth. A gift that he will never forget. Darren paused and laughed more wantonly. Yeah. He opened his arms and stretched his hands, feeling the wind and rain flowing around him. The wind is blowing. Darren smiled back and blinked at Zhang Guo and others. Get ready for battle, everyone. The pupils of Zhang Guo and Sakaski suddenly shrank into needles, and they turned their heads at the same time and looked in a certain direction. As if they saw something unbelievable, they were struck by lightning, and their eyes were fixed on that place. On the sea in the distance, a swaying boat appeared at some point. Two figures stood silently on the boat. Wearing a large dark green cloak, covering their figures and faces. Mysterious and dangerous. Tear. A pale thunderbolt suddenly fell from the dark sea of clouds, tearing through the dark sky. The flashing light of the thunderbolt briefly illuminated that direction. The figure under the hood, a domineering profile with a bloody and weird tattoo, flashed by. That is. Zhang Guo was shocked. Sakaski's eyes widened. Borisolino smiled strangely. On the boat, a tall figure standing in front slowly raised his hands. Then, a strong wind suddenly blew on the sea, stirring up surging waves. The purgatory-like wind, showing a twisted and torn dark green shape, howled in the heavy rain, looking extremely abrupt and weird. It expanded, engulfed, amplified, and continued to rise, and finally evolved into a vast hurricane that connected the sky and the earth, spanning between heaven and earth. The storm is coming. At the bow of the warship, Darren lit a cigar and smiled. The good show is on. This is, the storm of fate. This chapter is not short.